I'm on my way back from swimming. It's Friday evening, and I'm here at an 18th century threshing barn that sits at the top of my road in Oxford and just inside the confines of a municipal park. And this 18th century threshing barn is interesting to us not just because it connects to agricultural heritage. It's the site where threshing would have taken place when this was farmland. It's also very exciting because it's home to a boutique gin distillery, the Oxford Artisan Distillery. And that's inside the old threshing barn. It's exciting for us in heritage for several other reasons as well. The stills that they have are bespoke stills made for the company by an English steam engineering company. So that connects to the steam engineering heritage that we house at the MERL. But as well as that, it also has a stronger connection to the collections of the MERL, because the gin that they make here is made using heritage varieties that connect to an archaeobotanist called John Letts. And John and his research established that in layers of smoked blackened thatch, so that's the bottom layer of thatch in 15th century farm buildings and homes, and that's the layer of thatch that isn't removed when you re-thatch properties. You could find the various different cultivars that were present in crops of that period. And from those various different cultivars, John and his research was able to re-establish what the spread of different cultivars was in heritage crops and create essentially a contemporary heritage crop. So none of the dwarf wheats and none of the dwarf species that you get in modern cereal crops, but much taller crops. And they use these same heritage crops grown organically here in the local area to produce the spirits and the stills here. So it's really exciting for us to be here, and I would have been really enjoying sharing this site with you and having a tasting here as well. And we have, in the collections of the Museum of English Rural Life, examples of John Lett's grains and of his smoked blackened thatch. So there you go. That's the connection between an 18th century threshing barn, a park in Oxford, the top of my road, gin, and smoked blackened thatch.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 3 of Aima 2021, Past and Future Agricultures. We have the same technical setup, so please remember we're recording. If you're not presenting, please mute your mics and stop your videos. If you are presenting, please share your videos and be at the ready to unmute yourself when called upon. We're also having questions in the chat, so I'd encourage you, because I've been asking quite a few questions and I'm going to be busy today chairing and hosting and doing lots of things. Please do get involved and ask questions in the chat today. We've got some slight changes to the program, so I will add the latest version of the program to the chat very shortly. It should be available from the link on the website, though. These are only changes to the films that we're showing in the comfort break, so no major shifts to the core programming. It's really exciting for me to be welcoming our third and final keynote speaker, Nerupama Modwel. Nerupama joins us from the Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage, where she's the director of the Intangible Cultural Heritage work that they do. And Nerupama and her team are doing extraordinary work looking at really diverse range of ICH across India. And in particular, today, she's going to be sharing with us some work relating to agricultural intangible heritage. And I think there's some amazing learning for all of us because the work that they're doing is unique, inspiring, and really thought-provoking stuff. We thought we'd begin very briefly beforehand, if Nerupama is still happy to do so, with just a little bit of context, so that you have a sense of the context within which agriculture is happening now in India, and the kind of context within which Nerupama and her team are working in relation to this kind of intangible heritage. Nerupama, are you happy to take over just maybe 2 or 3 minutes and give us a sense of context? That would be wonderful.
Sure, sure. Thank you, Ollie. Yes, I would, before the presentation, maybe give a little context, because, many of the slides you would be looking at, they would appear totally different from perhaps what you may be used to. The thing with Indian agriculture is that, first of all, of course, there's the politics, that is another matter. And I don't think we should get into that just now. But other than that, uh, even though a large part of the population is engaged in agricultural activity, the livelihood for many farmers is still at a subsistence level. And that is due to a number of reasons. Perhaps, one is very small holdings due to, fragmentation, the social structure as such. And many people are just tenant farmers. They do not own the land that they cultivate. And there are many other problems that affect productivity, maybe to do with irrigation issues, dependence on rain-fed agriculture, poor cropping patterns. And one is also not sure if, a lot of the subsidies that are offered by the government from time to time to do with electricity or irrigation or, fertilizers, and various SOPs that are given, like farm loan waivers and so on, whether these even filter down to the marginal farmer. So this is the sort of backdrop. This is the situation which would account for, the continued use of old and fairly basic farming practices, as well as very limited mechanization on the field. And there are now, growing initiatives that are looking at increasing productivity, reducing inefficiencies, and adopting the old sustainable practices, in fact. But these are on a small scale. And while there are a lot of excellent institutions which are, getting into the research related to the scientific aspect of agriculture, or looking at disease control and so on, but my submission is that we also recognize and acknowledge and look at ways to document, whether through oral histories or through archiving, and look at ways to safeguard knowledge and viable practice related to traditional agriculture, uh, which is with the farming community, and explore how these can be adopted to suit current conditions in a way that it benefits the small farmer, and discover where whatever learnings there may be. I'm not saying they may be all good, uh, so beneficial or detrimental. Whatever learnings there are, in this knowledge, uh, we should take some lessons from that. That's where I'm coming from with this presentation.
That's really wonderful, and that's a really great bit of context for us all. For anyone who wants a little bit more context, then they might want to look back at the Aima virtual symposium that we ran recently, and Nerupama was part of a shared presentation with a couple of other colleagues, including Surajit Sarkar, who chaired a session yesterday. And Surajit has just offered a piece that gives a little bit of sort of potted history around seeds and seed histories in India, which is published on our 51 Voices project. Nerupama, with your permission, we'll go across to your presentation, the pre-recorded presentation now, and then we'll reconvene for questions at the end. So please put your questions in the chat, and a very quick reminder that there's a YouTube version of this is going to be posted in the chat, so you should be able to access a subtitled version, hopefully, from there. Thank you very much.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you all for inviting me to this session. Before I start, I must state that I am not an agriculture or museum expert. My scope of work has been in the sphere of safeguarding intangible cultural heritage in India through my institution, INTAC. So, what I'm trying to do today is explore elements of intangible culture and traditions in agriculture practice. A look at how some of these are still retained in India, while many others are disappearing, and finally, how these connect up with the Agriculture Museum. Intangible cultural heritage, or ICH for short, is a vast field that encompasses the domains of oral traditions and expressions, that is, spoken forms that pass on collective memory and knowledge, social practices, rituals, and festive events that reaffirm the identity of their practitioners as a group, knowledge and practices related to nature, like traditional ecological wisdom, knowledge of local flora and fauna, and medicinal practices, culinary traditions, performing arts like music, dance, and theater, and a traditional craftsmanship, that is, the knowledge and skills for this. What is important about ICH is that it is not frozen in time but living heritage. It entails transmission of skills and knowledge and is community based. Now, if you consider these elements of ICH, you may already see some intersection points with agricultural know how and customs, which incorporate an array of practices, an understanding of nature and of the land, and many related beliefs and rituals, festivals, and food ways. In India, much of this knowledge has been retained orally and has been passed down through generations. The challenge thus for us lies in trying to bring all of this in the purview of the agriculture museum space, which I shall touch upon in the last part of my talk. I would first like to explore the correlation between traditional agriculture and its intangible traits as seen, or in some cases no longer seen, in practice. Now, India is diverse in the socio-cultural aspects of agriculture across its varied geographies and communities. This diversity is also seen in its climatic zones, its varieties of soil and of seeds, and knowledge related to these seeds, to rain patterns and seasons, to sowing or rotation of crops, to manuring and irrigation. And it is this diversity that is at risk of fading, and this diversity that the value and significance of cannot be stressed enough. There is an immense wealth of history and oral practices in every Indian farming community. Here in India, the oral knowledge is remembered and reiterated in practice. This includes not just the functional knowledge of a wide variety of crops and their production, but a host of related intangibles that are based on the principles of respect for Mother Nature and what it gives you, and revering the grain that feeds you and the implements that enable this. In history, the Arthashastra of Kautilya, a great scholar from the Mauryan age, deals with the management of resources and details many agricultural practices. Megasthenes, a Greek envoy to the court of the Mauryan king, records the existence of irrigation, fruit cultivation, cereal crops, millets, pulses, rice, and the cultivation of two harvests in the year on account of there being two rainy seasons. There are also accounts of classification of soil and the seasons in this period. However, most often the best way to pass on knowledge of methods of cultivation has been not through the written word, but through easy to memorize songs, couplets, and proverbs. These have been derived from the time tested experiences of farmers and are sometimes no more than a line like manuring is more important than plowing, crop protection is more important than irrigation, and so on. One example of such a collection is the Gag Badri, belonging to the 14th or 15th century. And these relate to many topics like drought, rainfall, plowing, sowing, and yield. Serving as a guide to farmers, they have been in circulation for generations and are still popular in villages across North India, especially in the states of Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. Just to share with you a couple of examples of the Gag Badri, a saying on plowing goes, Gaher na jote bove dhan, so ghar kotila bhare kisan. Uh, Roughly translated into sowing paddy without deep plowing gives a good yield. And on mulching, it says, Gobar maila patti sade, tab kheti mein dana pade. When cow dung, farmyard manure, and leaf litter decompose, there is a good yield. And there are many more such sayings. Then there are several observational methods like the study of cloud formations, atmospheric changes, and bioindicators that are in use even now in parts of India. Intact's Natural Heritage Division did a study a few years ago on the skill of the local farming community in the arid western part of Rajasthan, where such forecasting becomes invaluable to farming. And from 1990 to 2003, researchers and farmers pooled their knowledge at the Gujarat Agricultural University to validate 8 of the most popular weather and climate related sayings and beliefs known to farmers. These sayings and proverbs would be based on years of observations of environmental phenomena and changes in nature and relating these to patterns of weather and climate. Such sayings are passed on orally and often put together in rhyme form for ease of memory. They have rituals and ceremonies that impart status and significance to the practical skills of agriculture. These may include consulting the Panchang or the Almanac to identify auspicious days for undertaking certain agricultural activities, invocations and offerings to various gods before plowing, elaborate rituals for harvesting, and many post harvest festivals. For example, the mainstay of the Wadli tribal community in Maharashtra is agriculture and the rice fields, and they will not start any agriculture related activity without first performing a religious ceremony seeking the local deity's blessings. So there are ceremonies like Koli Bhaji Khane and Nav Bhat Khane, which have a lot of significance. And there are many pujas or prayers done in the fields before harvesting the paddy. These are some of the images of rituals performed before and after the harvest. In farming communities, many rituals still in practice have either some ecological or socio-cultural or practical dimension to them. For example, an elaborate ritual known as Mundian Kalasam, seen in parts of Kerala during the heavy monsoon, which is a lean season for any agricultural activity, is to propitiate the god of cattle. What it results in is that all the nutritious offerings to the god, like red rice, gur, boiled peas, and chicken, are then fed to the farm animals, who may not have otherwise got this nutrition during the lean season. Then there's another ritual which involves leaving the land free right after the harvest, thus indirectly allowing the rejuvenation of the soil. Then there are hundreds of thousands of seed varieties and their life stories in India. Seeds are, I feel, the biggest symbol of farming and cultural traditions. I recently came across a gem of a compilation of indigenous varieties of rice by the Rupanta Trust in Chhattisgarh, compiled from an oral collection from the farming community of the region from 2000 to 2014. This document classifies and outlines the individual characteristics of hundreds of rice varieties. And these particular qualities of each seed variety may range from mapping its yield, size, color, fragrance, taste, nutrients, and usage to the time taken for ripening, its suitability for different soils, resilience to weather fluctuations and drought, resistance to pests, and so on. based on the principle that seeds are at the heart of food wealth and diversity, and that an understanding of these is nature's gift to the tribal communities residing here. It is a vast repository of indigenous seed knowledge, and we must explore ways to protect this and others like it. Related to this region, there is a festival called Akti Ka Tyohar, which takes place on Akshaya Tritiya, which is celebrated as the start of the farming calendar, sometime in the month of April-May, when farmers commence agricultural activities before the onset of the monsoon and pray to Mother Earth and Goddess Lakshmi. This is when farmers here take out their diverse seeds from storage and exchange these in the belief that everyone has a right to them, as seeds are considered an item of community ownership. Also fascinating are all the associated tales with many of these rice varieties and the advice given for choosing particular varieties. For instance, a few of these have thorns and are sown in areas where protection from wild boar may be required. Dr. Debal Deb, a farmer scientist who works with traditional farmers in Bengal to conserve indigenous seed variety, also links cultural loss with the loss of rice varieties. He rues that old customs and foods no longer have the same social meaning because the rice varieties associated with them are long gone, and many of the old land races being available only in gene banks or single farms. This means an erosion of folk knowledge and food cultures shaped by the distinctive properties of different varieties, like which of them contains more carbohydrates, more vitamins or metals, which is good for lactating mothers or for convalescent patients, which is a must for a wedding feast or for a sacred ceremony, and so on. Looking at continuing farming practices today, I think it is important to understand the relevance and current usage of tools, implements, seeds, and cultivation practices and document them in the context of the intangible knowledge they reveal. It would be quite interesting to study the biographies of these. Let me give you a few examples. One of the sayings cited earlier was related to mulching. For the Wadli tribal community in Maharashtra, this is an established practice even now. Before the onset of the monsoon, a traditional procedure known as rub involves covering the fields with dry leaves, twigs, and cow dung and setting these ablaze to produce ash as a fertilizer. And this also ensures that no weeds appear on the land while the seedlings are being prepared elsewhere for transplantation. Then you have many proverbs which talk about natural manure. To cite a personal example, my mother, for her farm in the foothills of western Uttar Pradesh, gave permission every year after the Kharif harvest to large groups of the pastoral nomadic community of Gujars to squat on her land. This community comes down from the mountains every winter to graze its livestock, comprising mainly buffaloes and a few goats. And this fertilizing practice establishes an annual link between the settled farm and the pastoral community and has worked as a mutually beneficial arrangement for both. Another example for a sustained practice is related to what is to be sown around the borders of the main field and in other non agricultural land. This typically means the planting of medicinal shrubs on the borders and watermelon, pumpkin, and bottle gourd on the riverbanks and riverbeds during the dry season to make use of the moisture in the soil. Coming to implements, the terrain obviously determines the kind of implements used in the past and now. The plough is a common sight across India. During one of our mapping projects, it was quite interesting to find an unusually large oxen drawn plough known as the Nangeli, made using wood and iron. It comes in handy for deep ploughing by the local Bagda farmers of Araku Valley in Andhra Pradesh. Storage practices have not seen too much of change either. One aspect of storage is to do with the purpose for doing this. To take another example from my mother's farm, which is largely basmati rice and wheat growing, apart from retaining seeds for the next crop, a few sacks of dehusked and unpolished rice would always be kept aside for personal consumption, as it is considered the healthier option to the double polished, better looking grain intended for the market. And this would be then sealed in containers with dried neem tree leaves to protect it from pests and insects, and it was good for the entire year. Some of the following images show the ingeniously constructed granaries or storage containers documented around the country. These practices ensure that the grain lasts for a long time, even decades in some cases. So here's a freshly made rice bundle in Assam and then stored inside the house. Then you have storage of grain in Assam, and in Maharashtra, the rice with the husk being stored in huge bamboo woven baskets, which are coated with cow dung to make them insect repellent. Another continuing tradition, which has perhaps seen a more conscious renewal in pandemic times, is to do with communal food security, where grain is stored not just in large granaries belonging to different clans, but contributed to a common pool in the village for emergency use by those in need. Then there are many traditional irrigation systems still in use. This example is from the fields of the Apatani people in Arunachal Pradesh, where you have a paddy field at the top, the water inlet system of the Apatani to prevent fish from entering the agricultural fields, and an elaborate system of channels for conserving water. Across the east and northeast of India, the farming practice includes the coexistence of fishing and rearing snails, etc., with paddy cultivation. This is typically done on the terraced lands in a separate section adjoining the main field. In another example of a continuing practice based on observation and experience, a study in 2008 by the Center for Community Knowledge in the dryland farming belt of Madhya Pradesh led to an interesting discovery. A local paddy seed of choice, known only as number 16, was found to date back to pre Green Revolution days when local varieties, especially successful in withstanding erratic rainfall, were collected and distributed by farmers in interpersonal seed borrowing practices in similar agri-ecological zones. Such seeds were later replaced by hybrid high-yielding varieties, but farmers reverted to their preferred seed when they needed to or were able to have access to it. Uh, Unfortunately, in many cases, many such varieties of seeds have been lost forever in the absence of records and preservation. In a different example from a very different region of India, P.S. Ramakrishnan, on the debate on jhum or shifting cultivation practices seen mostly in the northeast of India, advocates not forcing permanent cultivation on the local farmer and building on the oral knowledge of the tribal communities practicing jhum, arrived at over years and years of understanding their landscape. For example, fallow management, intercropping, and that trees like the Nepalese alder and the bamboo fix nitrogen in the soil. He outlines the general principle based on several studies that what is socially valued invariably has an ecological keystone value. And traditional knowledge is intertwined with social values and cultural practices. And although it is local, it embodies general principles based as it is on centuries of practice and experience. So, observation of landscapes and practices resulting from this over millennia is disappearing with every new generation. And an important task for us would be to identify and record vanishing intangible knowledge related to local farming practice. Some change in this over time is inevitable, but archiving it for its own sake and for the lessons it teaches us would be an important activity. Many parts of India are going through a phase where traditional methods of farming are beginning to mix increasingly with the modern. Uh, Although these are not advanced to the stage of combined harvesters or tractors, these shifts are related more to optimal mechanization to the extent of affordability, the land holding size, and the requirement for that specific land of the small farmer. This could be in the form of a power tiller, a mechanical thresher, an electric fan to help with the winnowing, or even the odd mobile rice mill. But many of the activities continue to be labor intensive. So you may see both the traditional practice and the use of basic machines on the same piece of land. Here you have manual threshing and a paddle driven thresher and a rice mill, all in the same farm, same area. Another interesting activity would be to collect histories of old implements to learn about change in farm practice. This change may be due to many reasons, some to do with changes in nature like climate change and erratic rainfall, and others due to the economic imperative related to the need to grow paddy for the mill, which requires different machine tools to maximize yield, whereas hand tools are used for less productive but more worthwhile varieties in terms of nutrients and taste that a small farming community may grow for its own use. This applies to seed usage as well. A workshop in Assam on rice cultures brought out this aspect quite clearly. While the need to increase their yield encouraged the farmers to try the newer hybrid varieties of rice for cultivation, they rued the loss of older varieties, and only the elder farmers among them could even recall the names of some of these varieties. In a somewhat related issue for agricultural produce, seasonal and local has always been the traditional mantra. Somewhere along the way, we have across the globe got, I feel, too used to having everything from exotic fruit and vegetables to quinoa and soya available to us easily and throughout the year. In India, too, we are losing sight perhaps of the ancient wisdom of eat healthy, eat local, eat seasonal. A couple of years ago, while helping a friend work on a publication on the special cuisine of her region, which is Meghalaya in the northeast of India, I realized the importance given to this mantra as I went through her compilation of traditional recipes and related stories and lore. There were set menus for each season with stipulations on what produce could or could not be consumed, with the beneficial or adverse effects of these, and what was taboo for which clan. Now, this is a typical example of such unwritten norms seen across India for every type of cuisine, which are now being eroded. So, identifying and documenting intangible knowledge and the changes in it over time becomes an archive of disappearing local agricultural practices and associated traditions. So, in this context, I see the Agriculture Museum as a living archive with museum keepers as biographers of agricultural practice. The Agriculture Museum can be conceptualized as a museum of intangible practice related to tangible objects such as seeds, tools, implements, weights and measures, and storage vessels, as well as culinary traditions. In regions with a thriving agriculture tradition, it should ideally stay connected with the farmer communities and the local population to enable and facilitate an active and ongoing engagement on past and present practices. For example, a suitable museum of living agriculture could have displays of the tools, materials used, and information on practices like soil health and fertility, crop rotation, native seeds, natural pesticides, and so on. Then, presenting the biography of a seed variety as a tangible thing with its intangible elements and associated tangible tools and structures that are used in its life cycle would be interesting for the local population where such seeds are to be found. On a similar note, in following the journey of a grain from farm to table, grinding would, for example, be a notable element. Grinding of the grain was earlier done with the help of cornstones, and although uncommon now, one can still come across the odd one in villages across the country. In Garhwal, in the hilly regions, folk songs have been traditionally sung by women at the time of cereal grinding, which would be typically corn, in the Jandaru. And I feel a working sample of this would be interesting to observe. The link between tangible and intangible also becomes the starting point for an archive of intangible knowledge practice, which could be housed in a museum as objects and also as collections of recordings of different kinds. The collections of this type of knowledge would help in preservation in the physical or digital museum space of farming heritage and practice. This would be an ongoing project, of course, and of archiving some of the oral knowledge of agri practices and traditional farming wisdom residing with and owned by communities, by the elders within these communities, or by informal institutions. This would be done by collecting or compiling the texts that pertain to this, by collecting oral histories from the farming communities, by documenting many of the indigenous innovations of farmers, and by studying the success stories of those who have implemented some of these practices in current times. Uh, at a time when agriculture is under stress, this would allow communities and traditional practices to remain aligned through dissemination of not easily accessed information, training workshops, and dialogue on best practices. Lastly, the museum should function, I feel, as a hub for the cultural aspect of agriculture as well, because that would definitely add to its popularity. To conclude, intangible heritage, traditional wisdom, and know how could be invaluable in providing solutions to deal with at least some of the problems of our modern times. And this is especially true for agriculture. Johan de Hulster, in a conservation brief for INTAC on conservation agriculture, said, and I quote, living heritage and tradition are extremely important and rich resources that are contained in every action of a farmer, in collective memory and in the praxis of the living agrarian classes. We have to treasure this wealth not as a relic of ancient times, but as a lasting appreciation of agriculture as an integral part of our time and society. This wealth is the basis for a future in which sustainable food production can be secured thanks to the experience and biodiversity it has created, and that has been passed on to us as a living heritage by generations of farmers. Agriculture needs to innovate in such a way that its very foundation is preserved. With that, I would like to conclude. Thank you very much for your time.
Nerupama, thank you enormously for a fascinating and a whistle-stop tour of the extraordinary work that you're doing at INTAC. We're going to go to the floor for questions in a second. I just want to sort of start with a thought and an observation of my own. You talk about treasuring the wealth of intangible cultural heritage and knowledge. And this is extremely important. I think we picked up a little bit on this in some discussion yesterday, and I'm not sure you were there when this happened, but talking about questions of copyright in relation to particularly archival content and information. And I wonder whether you could comment on the sense of ownership of knowledge, of indigenous knowledge, of local practices, and whether there are tensions in the way that you see that kind of work playing out.
Well, yes, that is an issue, in fact, with all ICH. So I suppose it would apply to this knowledge as well, because, you have a lot of indigenous knowledge, especially related to, medicinal practices. You have a lot of local health traditions in different parts of the country. And there are issues of copyright because, that is community knowledge and how do you sort of, if you copyright it, then who do you copyright it to? And I'm afraid these are unresolved issues currently. I don't know how these would be resolved, but perhaps one of the ways is that if you're archiving it and putting it in the public domain, then you are safeguarding to an extent.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and it connects in a way to the origins of sort of European and North American organic farming, which has, of course, its roots in Albert Howard's work in India. So there's a sense in which this rapidly sort of expands, doesn't it, globally, and these indigenous practices and traditions can be adopted more widely. I want to move on to, there was quite a lot of discussion in the chat, picking up on your exploration of Jum. And for those of you who don't know, this is a land clearance method that I think traditionally involves burning, and then its form of shifting cultivation. And there's a sort of tension there within environmental discourse, and various people picked up on this. Vijay Aditya and Carrie Lee from her context in Canada. This is also sort of relevant to hill sheep farming in the UK, where burning practices were carried out on heather moorland. I wonder whether you could just expand a little bit on those tensions with producer agronomists, environmental science policymakers, and also those traditional agricultural practices and the work that you do.
Well, I think I should let Vijay, if he is around, answer that, because he's actually an expert in our India group on agriculture, and perhaps he would be better placed to answer this, because it's not really my sort of
That'd be wonderful if Vijay's with us and able to
I'm there.
come on screen.
I'm there, Oliver.
Hi there, Vijay.
Hi.
Would you like to quickly answer some of these questions and sort of explain a little bit about the context in India?
Yeah, sure. I think one question was on regenerative agriculture, which is a very important topic, and it has been within the organic movement in India. Now a large number of people are looking at zero budget farming, which is essentially talking about the following regenerative practices in areas where, especially in areas where degradation of topsoil is happening. And there's a lot of issues related to also high input based agriculture, where certain crops have been replaced by high input based crop like rice, which has created a problem of both topsoil, water poisoning, as well as water overuse of water, which isn't available. So in these cases, there's a concentrated effort in which some policy support from the governments, state governments. In India, agriculture is both on a concurrent list, which essentially means states as well as center government can create policies on that. So several states have taken initiative in this direction, where they have started promoting from a point of view that the resources are not available for the farmers, like water, promoting practices like growing millets on a very large scale. So suddenly, from a crop which was lost, millet is making a comeback very heavily into the agro ecosystem, which essentially also is a very climate resilient crop for the areas where it is being chosen by the farmer, because incidentally it was being traditionally grown there. So this is one area. Your second question on crop burning is also a very it has many political as well as a policy implication, environmental implication in India. New Delhi suffers from smog every year because of large scale burning, and that has to do again with the choice of crop, unfortunately. And since that the whole issue is being dealt at a political level, at an investment level, traditional practices of rotation-based crop burning, that one village burns first and the second village burns next, and then you do rotation of crop burning, which is the traditional practices everywhere in the world. Unfortunately, he is being replaced by mass burning, where a large number of farmers together burn the crop because they have synced their cycle of crop sowing. So there are certain learnings which unfortunately are not coming into practice.
That's really wonderful. Thank you, Vijay, for that extraordinary, detailed and useful response. Nerupama, in the chat, Klaus Kropp has picked up on cattle traction and some of the work done in that respect, and talking a little bit about perception, economic sustainability, and also the fact that cattle traction offers the potential for a real circular economy. So he's highlighting the fact that there's a problem with the underuse of animals in many respects. He's also mentioning the Indigenous Livestock Society in India, and I wonder to what extent, in addition to intangible cultural heritage and then the material heritage, I mean, you picked up on seeds and animals to some extent, but that sort of living heritage alongside these two other forms of heritage, what are the key agencies you work with in relation to animals and plants in the Indian context?
Well, for animals, really, we haven't, been working with anyone. If you mean intact, no, we haven't. Our Natural Heritage Division has been working directly with the farmers, but on a pilot basis, to conduct workshops with them, to in fact, ironically, reteach the old methods, of natural pesticides and how to make natural pesticides and manure and sort of all those kind of root intensification and crop rotation. So they've been working with pockets of farmers, in Madhya Pradesh, for instance. So those have been those kind of projects. With AUD, we've been doing workshops in the northeast of India. So we are first trying to understand how much knowledge, this kind of knowledge is retained, first of all, with the farmers. And when we are doing this documentation, then you realize that the more sort of isolated the area, maybe there is more retention of the old practices, but maybe not so much in the areas that have seen or that have been exposed to other methods. So we are at the stage of documenting and understanding and, just hearing from a lot of farmers.
Yeah. I'll just pick up on that slightly with there's a comment from Ree Smith, and we'll maybe make this the last sort of question and comment, which is about non-verbal means of passing on tradition, and presumably in the documentation of across that range of ICH, you're looking at dances, at ritual practices, at storytelling, etc., as well as agricultural techniques and processes. The connections between those different areas, I think, are what Ree's picking up on. So the degree to which they provide insight into physical techniques, gestural processes in a stylized way, ploughing, casting seeds, that kind of thing. Are there particular examples of that you can think of? And is that playing a part in sort of regenerating some of this practice as well?
Well, with all ICH, I think a lot of the techniques of agriculture would be passed on through observation and just observation and practice. I am not so sure that it would be through dance or ritual, because those are also quite particular about what the purpose for that is. So that would be related to that particular ritual. I don't think it would go into the techniques of agriculture.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Just to sort of sum up, I was very struck by lots of the parallels, as I always am when speaking to colleagues in India, between the sort of early period of establishing the MERL and the desperate sort of salvage ethnographies that underpinned the drive to get the collections here off the ground, and the kind of work that the urgent and vital work that you're doing at the moment. There are lots of questions and discussion going on in the chat about establishing agricultural collections of material culture in India, oral histories, sort of parallels to the sort of European and North American models of practice. So I wonder, just as a final comment, whether you could come in on that again and pick up on those sort of emerging networks of practice and the degree to which your work is steering them in a different direction, which I think is really exciting.
Yes, in fact, that is what we have been aiming to do. We are wanting to, get together a group and work on creating a network where we, work with universities, agricultural universities that may have already got collections or, information or documentation, and, getting together a whole lot of these kind of formal and semi-formal or informal institutions, because there are a lot of little, initiatives as well. So trying to get together all of these and see if we can make a, common, create a common platform where we could have this kind of, collection based. That's the attempt. So let's see where we go.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Nerupama, thank you once again for a fascinating keynote session, and for Vijay for dipping in as well. Thank you everyone for excellent questions and discussion in the chat. Maybe we can maybe carry on some of that discussion there. We're going to take a short break. If we break for, I think, 12 minutes and we come back at what would be 2 p.m. British summertime, whatever that is in your local time, we've got 2 short extra films in the break, and then we'll come back for the following session, which is presided over by my colleague from Aima, Deborah Reed, who's Curator of Agriculture and Environment at the Henry Ford. So that's the session 8, Bringing the Past to Life. So back at 2 p.m. British Summer Time. Thank you again, Nerupama.
We're here in one of the stores of the University of Reading Special Collections and Museum of English Rural Life.
I'm Adam Lyons, Collections Academic Liaison Officer.
And I'm Claire Clough, Special Collections Librarian.
And in the period of just 2 minutes, we're going to try and show you as many treasures that we hold as possible.
This is one of the oldest items in our collections. It's an early 15th century book of hours, and it was made in Paris. And it's like a personalised prayer book. It's an illuminated manuscript, so all of the text and all of the decoration would have been made by hand.
One of the oldest items we have here in the collection is this 12th century charter of Henry II for the souls of himself and his family.
This 17th century book was chained to its bookcase in a church in Abingdon. This was so that it could be used by certain people but not taken away.
Mr. Porter collected every piece of unsolicited mail that dropped through his letterbox from the 60s right the way through to the noughties, offering us a fantastic insight into the social history of the later part of the 20th century.
Now this is a real treat. We also have a collection relating to the Great Exhibition of 1851, and this was a diorama that was created to give people an impression of what they could have seen.
The daily experiences of people in the countryside are captured here in the historic farm records, recording the daily lives of people on estates and farms across the land.
Now you might have heard of land girls, who were part of the Women's Land Army. This was established in World War I but reinstated for World War II. But did you know that they had their own magazine? This proved very, very popular, and it was intended to unite land girls across the country.
The Nancy Astor Archive is a fascinating and vast resource showing what life was like for the first female MP to take her seat in the House of Commons.
Here we are with some English Reformation history. This is an edition of Fox's Book of Martyrs, and it was published in 1633, and it's essentially a book written by Protestants about their suffering under the previous Catholic regime.
The Evacuee Archive here at MERL contains over 500 individual memoir accounts of children during the Second World War, including some that were sent overseas as far as Canada.
This is Robert Hooke's Micrographia. It was published in 1665, and it's the first work to show under the microscope.
Everyday scenes from 20th century rural life, as shown through the medium of the photographs of the Farmers Weekly magazine, held here in their photographic archives, over 10,000 original images.
This is a work by Copernicus, published in 1566, and he was the first to show that the planets revolved around the sun.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
With so many fascinating collections at your fingertips,
It just begs the question, what will you discover?
If you've been to the museum since 2016, you might be familiar with the wall hanging behind me. It's a textile that was designed for the Festival of Britain displays on South Bank in London in 1951. And it was designed by an artist called Michael O'Connell and completed by a team of studio assistants, Iris and Betty Sheridan, who worked with him, to produce these extraordinary wax-resist tied textiles, which then formed a 46-metre-long display in the country pavilion of the South Bank Festival site. Until recently, we'd imagined that these wall hangings hadn't really been on public display very much, until the 1990s, when a former colleague of ours, the late Jill Betts, conducted some research into their history, the ways in which O'Connell and his team had made them, and the displays at the Festival of Britain site. What Jill Betts discovered was that they'd been placed on display, and then when the displays came down in September 1951, they were packed up, as were many other bits of the Festival of Britain displays, and dispersed to other sites around the country. Jill had them photographed in the university squash courts in the 1990s as part of her research process. When we came to redisplay the museum in 2016, it was an exciting opportunity to do loads of things with collections that hadn't been seen very much. And as a result, we had two of these wall hangings, Kent and Cheshire, conserved. The one behind me is Kent. We had a competition at the time to decide chalk or cheese, chalk being the chalky landscapes of Kent and cheese being the cheesy implications of a Cheshire landscape. The other ones in the series depict other topographies and landscapes from around the country. So the idea was to create, in 1951, this sense of what kind of traditional agricultural practices were happening in the landscape and had happened over the millennia leading up to that point. Kent, as you can see, has oast houses and fields and hop farm activity going on, lots of exciting stuff that indicates that this is that particular county. And likewise, Cheshire has things that indicate what happens in Cheshire. We've long had the plan that we would swap these over at some point. So chalk giving way to cheese. Now is that moment. So the first wall hanging, Kent, has been on display for 5 years. And as we know, textiles are light sensitive, and on top of that, the textiles hang on their own weight, and that can be damaging if left for a long period of time. But it's also exciting to have a chance to share with you another of these exciting and vibrant pieces of art. So it's great that when we welcome people back into the museum after a long period of closure, they'll be coming back not to see Kent, which will have gone back into storage, but to see Cheshire, chalk giving way to cheese. We've also discovered, since Jill Betts did her initial research in the 1990s, that these wall hangings were on public display in various other guises in the intervening period. As soon as 1952, at the Royal Show in Newton Abbot in rural Devon, the museum itself used all of these wall hangings as the backdrop to its own mobile museum displays. So they hung rather unceremoniously, admittedly at the back of a fairly ramshackle trade stand, in which there was a well-designed museum display. We wouldn't hang them out in a Royal Show environment now, and you wouldn't see us hanging them out at the Berkshire Show. But we do want to share them wherever possible. So in preparation for our 51 Voices project, we were looking back through the documentation that charts the history of these collections, both before and during the time that they've been part of the museum's holdings. And we were excited to learn that at least one of them travelled elsewhere in England in 1955. 1955 is a significant year for the museum because it's the date the museum opened the very first time to the visiting public. It had been on those peripatetic mobile museum trips to various agricultural shows up and down the country, as we know, but in 1955 they opened fixed, permanent displays at the university's White Knights campus. These wall hangings weren't placed on display. They were too large, and probably it was a very short time after they'd been seen by many millions at the Festival of Britain. But in 1955, York Castle Museum wrote to the museum and requested the loan of one of the wall hangings for display in a temporary exhibition at that museum. So we know that one of the wall hangings, and we're guessing it was probably Yorkshire, went up to Yorkshire, up to York Castle, and was placed on display. So if you happen to know anything about that display, we'd love to hear from you, because we've never seen photos or heard stories about that moment before. And the story we'll share with you later in the year about the wall hanging's greater travels involves them heading to the global south, where we think they played a minor walk-on part in a very significant moment in global history.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to day 3 of Aima 2021. Before I hand over to the chair of our next session, Deb Reed, I just want to go over the technical points again. We are recording the event. Please check your Zoom profile is in your own name, as that's helpful for managing the questions in the chat. If you're not participating live, then please keep your mic muted and your camera off. Questions can be posted in the chat, as I've said several times, and will be read to panelists on your behalf. There might be pronunciation or clarification issues, which mean that we might invite you to come on and speak. And where pre-recorded presentations have been received in good time, we will be posting links to YouTube videos in the chat. Not all of today's videos, I think, will have subtitles, I'm afraid, but we'll post what we have in that context. I'm now going to hand over to Deborah Reed, my colleague from the Aima Executive Committee and also Curator of Agriculture and Environment at Henry Ford. Deb, I'm sure, is familiar to many of you, and this is the next session, session 8, Bringing the Past to Life. Deb, are you happy to come on and introduce our panelists?
Hello, Ollie, yes, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much to the MERL for supporting this important conversation. And I have the pleasure of bringing an action-packed and jammed 3+1 pre-recorded messages to you. We're all related to bringing the past to life. So this session carries on themes that we heard in the introductory keynote here on agriculture and the intangible. And I think this session really does cast an eye toward regenerative agriculture, and that is documenting what exists or existed and proactively preserving and rebuilding knowledge and skills. And what we'll learn from these papers is how folks in 3+1 countries have done this. These presentations indicate that experiments, investments, and partnerships hold the key. Building direct links between our rural and agricultural collections, rural communities, and special interest groups can ensure that our work endures and that others survive and thrive. So this 3+1 case studies show us how to proceed. And first, and I'll introduce each now, and the recordings will flow. The first emphasizes collections, experiments, and the deep knowledge essential to this work. Clough is head of the Larsham Open Air Lab for Experimental Archaeology. He specializes in medieval settlement archaeology and reconstructing early medieval agriculture, including animal husbandry. Ongoing experimental work is well conveyed in his PhD research that focused on the use of draft cattle in the early Middle Ages. And expert social media user, you can follow Dr. Kropp and Larsham on social media, and you may be inspired by him, especially because of his recent successful draft animal conference and his dedication to the experiment that he's conducting in medieval agriculture with his colleagues at Larsham. Second, we'll learn about rural community and museum connections and the essential work that these partnerships provide. So Dr. Cosette Griffin-Kremer is an associate researcher at the Center for Celtic Research. She holds a doctorate in Celtic Studies and an advanced degree in the history of techniques from the School of Advanced Studies in Social Sciences at Paris, EHESS. She has also worked with Aima significantly as Secretary General, but also producing these really meaty newsletters that are all on our website, done semi-annually. And she's also participated in the European Science Foundation projects EARTH, which is Early Agricultural Remnants and Technical Heritage, and really modeling her amazing skill at drawing together networks. And in EARTH, it included archaeologists, archaeobotanists, and archaeozoologists, all partnering to help preserve these local breeds, among many other things, including local plants and rural culture. The third indicates the role of special interest groups. And in this case, it's Pierre Del Porto, who is president of the French Federation of Museums of Agriculture and Rural Heritage. Pierre has an engineering degree, agricultural degree, and has worked many years with agricultural promotion through SAPEX's Livestock and Traceability Department, which he directed for 20 years, and then managing Paris's International Agribusiness Show for 15 years. Pierre is also the Aima treasurer, and we're looking forward to him and his sharing of the Aima support for documenting and preserving agricultural heritage on mills and rural heritage. And then last, as time allows, we will flow into the break with this. We'll hear from Chantal Bischkop at the Center for Agrarian History at the University of Leuven in Belgium, Flemish Belgium. Hers models the combination of these, the university-based research center, plus the use or the role of special interest groups, draft horse advocates specifically, and the effort to document the Brabant Belgian draft horse. So without further ado, we look forward to these sessions.
Just to add to that, sorry to interrupt, Deb, we actually made a slight change to the running order because the three presentations are quite long and we don't want to lose time for questions and discussion. So we're going to play Chantal's right at the end of the day instead and play a different, shorter presentation in the break that's just come in. But thank you for that, Deb.
Hello, my name is Klaus Krupp, and I'm the manager of the Laurasam Laboratory for Experimental Archaeology, which is part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site Lorsch Abbey. It is a real pleasure for me to tell you today a little bit about our ongoing research projects concerning and circulating around medieval agriculture, and to see whether it's enabling us to learn something from the past for our present day and future challenges in agriculture, and if it may lead us into a more sustainable future. Let me first introduce the site to you in order to make it easier to understand where all this research is conducted. The Openel Laboratory is a scale 1-to-1 model of an early medieval manorial site, including houses, equipment inside the houses, meadows, fields, livestock. So basically a holistic approach to showcase how we think based on scientific research an early medieval site like this, basically around 800 AD, might have looked like. So on one hand, it is an educational site, but on the other hand, it is also a research facility, a playground for research to find out more from an experimental archaeological perspective about certain aspects of early medieval life, be it agriculture. This is something I will focus on in the next couple of minutes, but also indoor room climate and settlement archaeology. What I want to give you now is a very brief introduction in our new experimental approach towards a better understanding of, in particular, early medieval agriculture. And one thing which has or can't be stated enough is that it took us almost 4 years to gain enough experience, this is a key word here, to actually do all the agricultural work on a level using animal traction, using the reconstructed tillage implements, to do it on a level which comes at least close to what the people might have done 1,200 years ago. So when we look at this picture here, you basically see a colleague of mine on the left-hand side working a field or a first field in 2015, and I think we can all agree that it doesn't look really professional and the furrows aren't straight at all. But 3 years later, the perspective changes. We had 3 years to get into the mindset of the tasks a medieval farmer would have to cope with and to get used to the implements, the fine-tuning of the implements. And now in 2018, for example, well, this picture is from, we even were able to be part of the World Plowing Championship, which took place in Germany back then. So experience is key. So most of the aspects I will talk about and the results especially I will talk about are not starting before 2018 as a starting point, although we already started with the project in 2015. So using the case study of ridge and furrows, I want to showcase you some interesting strategies we were able to, well, research, which seem to have been common in the early Middle Ages as a risk minimization strategy, which was used to, well, basically diversify and to minimize risks, especially when it comes to weather extremes. We will dig into that a little later. So first of all, maybe a little insight for those of you who don't know ridge and furrows, what that field system includes. Ridges and furrows are basically a mix of ridges and furrows next to each other. They can be more than 1 kilometer long and several hundred meters in width. The individual ridge and furrow bedding, let me put it that way, is usually 10 to 15 meters in width and has the highest point somewhere between 50 centimeters and 1 meter 20. There are two possibilities to create these ridges and as a result also these furrows. One and most important possibility is the use of a moldboard plow. You have an asymmetric plowshare, you have a moldboard, and then you have the way of plowing that you always plow into the center of the field. You have to, after your first furrow, you have to do a really sharp turn, then you turn again to the center of the field, and then after a while and after a couple of years you actually are enabled to create that combination of larger ridges and furrows in between these ridges. This is a process we are following in the Openel Laboratory every year, and therefore have a quite well insight into the creation and also the maintaining of these ridges and furrows. We not only plow the fields, and this also includes draft measurements, for example, with the draft animals, but we also do the seeding, the working in of the seed, and as well as, of course, the harvesting part in the Openel Laboratory, sometimes even using reconstructed early medieval sickles. All of the agricultural tasks at the Openel Lab also including this ridge and furrow system, is embedded in an overall 3-field crop rotation, which means a combination of summer crops, winter crops, and fallow land. This is something which came into use on a more larger scale in that said early medieval context. What is very important for our work is that we try to document as many factors as possible, set up as many research parameters as possible to document everything that is happening in the ground and above the ground. We have a professional weather station including soil sensors, we do soil analysis, we also yield analysis, we look at the height of the field crops. So basically everything we can to get a, well, the most holistic approach ready for our final result analysis, if that field system had any advantages or disadvantages. So let's come to one or two of these first results we have. And it came to us that the last 3 years or 4 years being years of extremes, first 2 or 3 years being very severe droughts, and the last year, this picture quite visible this year in this case, a very wet year. We had storms, we had lots and lots of water, we had hail, that all of these extreme years enabled us to, well, have first results better visible than we would have had in an average year. And this comes, or it becomes very visible when we take a year of a drought. In this case, you look here, you see in this graph the height of the stems of our spelt in 2018-19. You see that this blue line, the height of the stems in the furrows was higher than on the ridges. And this has something to do with a longer availability of water in this dry year in the furrows. And now, a couple of years later, with this wet year, we're just doing this analysis right now in these days, is the turned around result. We have higher and longer stems on the ridges, and we have shorter ones on the furrows, because now it's really wet and the plants in the furrows have more stress than those on the ridges. Also, when you think about the yield itself, it becomes clear that in this case of a drought, this system of this combination of ridges and furrows brings an overall average harvest, no matter what the extreme is. When you look at this year of drought, we have almost double as high yield in the furrows than on the ridges, and we're pretty sure that this year it'll be turned all around. So what's the perspective of this approach? I think it became clear that it is definitely important to reevaluate and to research these field systems from the Middle Ages, and in combination with the knowledge of the broad variety of different field crops they used, also other field systems, open field systems they used, and seeing the potential of these cultivation methods, we should ask ourselves if in this case it's not really possible to learn something from the past for the present. And we are happy to invite you as fellow researchers, but also the interested public, to visit this project of ours and to help us develop even more and new research questions. And this should be the end of my talk for now, and I'm looking forward for a lively discussion. Thank you for your attention.
Hello, I'm Cosette Griffin Kramer, And the first thing I want to say is the thanks to the Museum of English Rural Life and the University of Reading for hosting us, and to Ollie Douglas and Isabel Hughes for all the work organizing. Engaging with the living heritage of local breeds in museums, living history sites, and a bit more, especially heritage breeds in their environment, just like local cuisine, that enables their preservation and promotion, with special emphasis on how animals collaborate with humans. A major question in this whole ecosystem is the transmission of skills, a giant topic that we can hardly touch on today. I'm going to concentrate on examples from Europe and the United States, and have added the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 17 logo, representing partnerships for the goals, because museums' activities involving local animal breeds lead to so many of the other SDGs. This will cover a variety of domestic farm breeds with a special emphasis on animal energy in agricultural work. Although it will center on sites of various kinds that keep living animals in both urban and rural settings, this in no way hinders museums from effectively showing animal breeds without having them on site. At our host, the MERL in Reading, the standard absolute unit is a RAM that demonstrates just how much stories bring life to museums and their collections, and highlights the museum's links to the Breeds Association directly responsible for the Exmoor horn sheep. Now to move on to a national agriculture and food museum that has vast premises dedicated to animals. That is the National Museum of Agriculture and Food Industry of Poland near Szreniawa, in Szreniawa near Poznan. Szreniawa is the first European institution, as far as I know, to hold a series of international conferences on live animals in museums, and with the explicit intention of promotion and public education on the subject of native breeds. The museum also possesses rich archives and can trace imports for breeding programs from all over Europe. Today, they have a very rich collection of animal collaborators, housed in cutting-edge comfort, about half of them native Polish breeds. Needless to say, when the Polish zootechnician team wanted to arrange a European tour to 2 museums in Germany and 1 in France, it was easy for us to do this, and they were also able to meet the president of the French Society of Ethnozootechnics, and a recent issue of their journal has an article entitled Preserving Domestic Biodiversity, From Threatened Species to Species of the Future. Far smaller museums can also do big things. For example, the Musée de Perche in that region of France is specialized in a festival event for the world-famous local horse breed of Percherons every year in mid-August. That attracts Percheron owners from all over Europe and beyond. There are also good reasons for a museum not to utilize local breeds, as at the UNESCO World Heritage Site of Klosterlosch in Germany. Their work centers on 8th to 9th century farming, and they chose working oxen of the Rhaetian Grey breed, whose wither size corresponds to iconographic documentation of the period. This means that their oxen fit the reconstructed tillage implements and enable analysis of how those worked with the animals and in the soil. And of course, the oxen are also stars in the museum shop as stuffed animals. Moving out of Europe to one of its colonial extensions in North America, the historic site of Mount Vernon, first President George Washington's home and farming estate. All of this is thanks to Jeanette Berenger of the Livestock Conservancy, who was there for the launch of the U.S. Postal Service Heritage Breed stamps. And Mount Vernon exhibits today several heritage breeds like the Jackstock Donkey and the Narragansett Turkey. The Livestock Conservancy consults widely with museums and historic sites in the search for as near authentic as possible representatives of breeds, but we'll see later that this can be far more complicated than a casual visitor might imagine. On with the wealth of links the Aima network often enables. When Jeanette was searching for original photos of the Bordelaise cattle breed, Denis Richard, director of the Écomusée de Marquez in France, was able to send her professional photographer's work, including fly masks for the cattle and COVID masks for the handlers. Remaining in France for the moment, I would like to step out of the box a bit and say this festival represents a living history for the future site that pops up every 4 years as a massive event for stock breeding and alternative agricultures. In 2018, 60,000 people dropped in to visit for the 8th festival over 4 days. And with good reason. The Nantes breed numbers stood at over 150,000 in 1949 and had crashed to some 50 animals by 1985, near extinction, when the flame was taken up by some very obstinate farmers. A book dedicated to the Nantes breed has a chapter entitled Cattle Breeders in Search of Meaning, which sums up what the whole event is about: promoting local breeds, solidarity among farmers and their friends, and inviting a guest of honor. The fete regularly hosts a guest breed from another French region, as the Basque swine in 2018, and the draft animals demonstrate work and equipment every single day of the festival. Local breeds associations like the Curator play a central role in the organization. Let's go back to the postal service. Stamps are important. They're meant to mark mines, even if only fingertip size. So it is no surprise to see local breeds highlighted along with local landscapes, just like the local cuisine with local products as promoted by Slow Food. And this link with the environment should be quite clear by now in the examples, large and small, of museums and living history sites. And now we can go on to another example that bridges museums and people concerned by the promotion of local breeds in several European countries. This is the mainly German collection of friends called the German Working Cattle Group, with strong attachments to local breeds, local harness, and the breeds often on the German red list of endangered animals. They have two kinds of meetings at the home farms of individual members and in some of the large open-air museums in Germany, such as you see here. One of the museums is located in the heart of the German capital in a totally urban site in Berlin. This is the Domaine d'Ulm, where the farm manager, Astrid Masson, keeps species on the national red list, endangered and heritage breeds, and is an active member of the German Rare Breeds Promotion Group. Among the breeds are the red upland cattle from mid-Germany that you see here. First, meet our heroes, Emma on the left, Astrid on the right, who is also author of a remarkable manual on working with cattle in museums. The archaeozoologist Eva Rosenstock proposes that many of the prehistoric European monuments were in fact due to field clearance by animal traction and of course oxen, the field clearance of glacial retreat debris. She gave Emma and Astrid an assignment for the working group meeting, and here it is. It's a 1-ton monolith, a 1-ton monolith. Emma had had a calf 10 days just before this, and Astrid checked with the farm veterinarian that the mother could undertake a slightly ambitious task. And of course, as you see, she did it. Now, away from the big city for a final stop at one of France's finest eco-museums, certainly the most magical, the Ecomusée d'Alsace. For just a glimpse of the Theatre of Agriculture, an ever-evolving program of real field, garden, and vineyard agriculture, which is the living center of public education, and a showcase for skills from milking to plowing using local breeds. It is also the yearly meeting venue for the French ox drivers group, with the Ecomuseum's consultant expert ox driver, Philippe Kuhlmann, and his Vosges cattle breed that is triple purpose. Philippe is among the very few, if perhaps the only breeder in France, who insists on farming with no motorized implements, though with mechanized equipment, often of his own invention. As he likes to say, never buy a tractor, and you will instantly have a lot of very good ideas. The cattle you see here have the typical Vosges markings, though the red patches are characteristic of only 5% of this breed. The Alsace Open Air Museum would dearly like to have some Zundkau goats, once common in southern Alsace. We consulted with Astrid in Berlin and the German Rare Breeds Promotion Group to ask about where to find a Zundkau, and the answer from her colleague, Carola Stier, was very revealing in a nutshell. If you don't have the original herd books, you won't know what they were aiming at, and the generational turnover in goats is so short that there may be very little left of the original targeted genetics. In short, the Alsatians may never find their goats in any officially certified form. This brings us back to the vital role that linkage with outside experts and other institutions can play in museums, historic sites, and parks of all sizes. So we can go back to Jeanette Berenger of the Livestock Conservancy to look at a question people rarely think to ask about: money. Is it possible to estimate the value of an animal working for a museum leave it to an American judge. A visitor to the North Carolina Outer Banks Wildlife Preserve in the United States shot dead one of the wild horses there, and nobody was pleased, so the culprit was taken to court. After a detailed inquiry, the judge in charge of the case decided that the horse's individual value over a lifetime of service to local tourism, with 2,500,000 visitors per year to the islands, came to the tidy sum of between $15 and $17 million, or 14 and 15 million euros. ALFAM, the Association for Living History Farming and Agriculture Museums, has long been one of the Aima's most vital partners, and during their conference in June, veterinarian Barb Corson discussed domestic breeds conformation, and the enormous genetic plasticity involved when animals are selected for specific traits without foreknowledge of knock-on effects. The spectrum of what Aima members and friends institutions engage their public with runs from proposing a cuddly toy as a souvenir right across to expectations of this sort of in-depth learning experience about the debates in stock breeding genetics. Some of the people and places we have encountered here tell us much about the importance of local breeds, especially as an integral part of their environment, about working towards food security within broader sustainable development goals. That some farmers and much of the public are in search of meaning in their relations with animals. Among many angles of approach to helping institutions thrive and promote their relevance, dealing with rare, local, and heritage animal breeds is one of the most fruitful, and the people in museums you've just met, so briefly, prove it.
Hello, my name is Pierre Del Porto. I am the president of AFMA. AFMA is the French Federation for Museums of Agriculture and Rural Heritage. Today I would like to introduce you to an event in France called Les Journées du Patrimoine de Pays et des Moulins, Rural and Mills Heritage Open Days. This event is born in 2002. It's not the same as the European Open Days for Heritage. It's specific to the country. It takes place the last weekend of June in France, and the main target of this event is to make a communication between the town, the agriculture, and the rural life. We want to educate the families, the scholars, but also the elected people to what we do on the rural environment, rural know-how, what the countryside is, and how we can inform the population about what is nature and what is rural life. It's also the National Mills Day, because you must know that in France we got more or less 20,000 mills, either water mills, either windmills. To organize this event, we are 7 national partners involved in heritage. 7 partners, which are the Federation of Cultural Heritage and Environment Associations, a group of associations, or AFMA, National Federation of Agriculture Museums and Rural Heritage. We also have Maison Paysanne de France, which is a character country homes association, the National Association for Mills Protections, the famous National Federation for Heritage, one group of association organizing summer restoration workshop for youngs in France, but also abroad. And the last one arrived last year is a small character towns village association, village or towns and less than 3,500 people. Every year, the steering committee, composed from the 7 national partners, meets and try to find out a common item, subject, which is adapted to all our partners, and which will be the next year main item. For example, the first was about earth, then we go for material as stones, then along the waterside, lanes, dates and characters, round heritage, trades and know-how, rooftops, towers and steeples, always looking for something common to all the countryside and adaptable. Country recipes and know-how, middle age always present, feast and fairs, human and animals, intangibility and sustainability. And the last one we'll see later this year was the tree, its life and its use. When the title is decided, the subject, we dispatch this information more or less in autumn to all France, any place, any association, members or not members of our 7 partners, tourist boards, lord mayors, countryside association, and so on. Then each one is looking for which kind of animation they can do, pedagogical demonstration, visits, guided visits, craft organizations, and so on. The registration is free. They just have to connect to a specific website to register themselves, all their animations. As we are in June for this event, it's a good opportunity to inform, to communicate about what will be the summer in every part, in every village, what will be the festivals, exhibitions in our museums and everywhere. For example, we have some artists exhibiting some paintings on subjects. We have inaugurated new 2 boats, wood boats on the Loire Valley, sailing boats. And we have inaugurated in Rambouillet also a kind of nature new theater, open to public in a very green landscape for concerts, theater, and so on. Every animation, every organization registered between January until April. Then all the national program appears on our national website and on the social medias like Facebook or Instagram. We have an interactive map, as you can see here, where you can choose where you want to visit, what you want to visit, and so on, with a description of each animation, each place, timings, and so on, registration or non-registration. Usually it's free. This year, last June, we had a record of more than 1,000 events. For this event, we have a patron. His name is Jean-Pierre Pernaut. He is very well known from every people in France. He is our French TV main news presenter at the midday news, but he is also involved in the rural heritage and regions communications about know-how, craft, and so on, customs, and so on. During his 33 years of work at the TV, he has done more than 15,000 reports on this rural life, which are all available actually. He offers us every year between 1 to 4 reports the week before our events. These reports are presented at the midday French news, and it's a good way to announce and to launch our event. In October, too, we have another presentation, press conference, and open to public during the international exhibition about cultural heritage taking place in Le Louvre in Paris to explain our future next year subject. Our communication program includes press file, press kit, website. We send to every of the animation 10 posters to use as a display, sign roads, or also to dispatch on all the shops of the village and so on, place of interest, to announce our events. We also use tourist boards. They all receive the information to communicate, and also the mayors of each village receive via the press his own information. On the Saturday of the launching, we have every year a meeting with all the partners, 7 partners, presidents are here, and sometimes our patron, to launch the information in front of the press. Here we were in Rambouillet, where they have organized 17 animations about the tree and its life and its use. And here you see the draft horses used for logging. From a past event survey in each location, we register the number of visitors. Depending of the actuality, depending of the climate, depending of the political elections, the number of visitors vary from 80,000 visitors until 180,000 visitors. We are expecting actually the figures for this year, because in France we had some elections the Sunday. The total expenses represent more or less 10,000 euros, plus the time spent by each association or the coordination people from Patrimoine Environnement. And we share that between one subsidy of the Ministry of Culture, and the balance is paid by the 7 partners, same amount for each partner. This year, the main topic, national topic, was the tree, its life and its use. And we have lots of very diversified animations by individuals and also by collectivities. Animations about fruits, about woodworking, about any kind of art with wood, wood music instruments concerts, for example, rediscovering the interest of the edges, visiting the forest, guided visits, mills architecture, and even birch sap texting. Here you have the journal organized by a primary class school. We have a competition, national competition in all France regarding the main item. This year we asked the class to work on the tree and wood. And here you have their journal with the past of the wood, the actual wood, and the future of the wood. And they take for the future all the reconstruction of Notre Dame de Paris with 1,300 oaks actually pre-selected and cutted to repair the roof of the Notre Dame de Paris. More and more agriculture museums are participating. 30 this year, individuals or associations. They organize specific visits about the tree, visiting a conservatory orchard, for example, with 50 varieties in Burgundy, welcoming craft people for making chestnut basket, visiting local timber construction, architecture, or specific visits of the museums about everything concerning tree, wood, pressing the fruits, for example. Also inside the museums, visiting the production of honey, different kinds of beehives, like this one just freshly finished by an artist inside of a big oak tree, or visiting the trees around the museums or inside the villages. Typical old-time cutting the wood, a new lane inaugurated for children with a naked feet promenade, or as in Alsace or in Normandy, their wheel workshop, for example. Since 3 years now, the president of AFMA is chairing the steering committee of the Semen partners. After the 23rd editions, we may think about a new evolution of these open days. What we can propose is to open this event, actually national event in France, and open it to other countries all around the world, or just at least European countries. Why not? This is our proposal. We can study it through the Aima too. This presentation will be available in French through Aima and through AFMA. And I want to thank all the people helping for informations and photos of this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre, and thank you, Cosette and Klaus. And we have run out of time, but I would very much like to have participants respond or have the opportunity to respond to at least one question. You can see there are many in the chat, but Klaus, we'll start with you. And Ree Smith asks, have you done any research on visitor responses to the project?
Yes, actually we do. It is always quite interesting on both levels to see fellow research institutions coming to see the project and to see, coming from organic agricultural departments, for example, to learn from that past perspective to future. So there are many more other aspects of the projects, like us working with the pigs on the fields, which highlight that learning from the past aspect as well. But also the visitors. I mean, as in many respects, museums have one key element, and that is their accessibility to the public. And people learn about agriculture, even 21st century agriculture, by visiting the museums, because usually, especially when it comes to animal husbandry and livestock keeping, in 90% of the times, it is behind closed doors practice today. So, and they play a key role for connecting many of these sustainability themes to the wider public. And I think you cannot underestimate that fact. And this is something, at least for my work, I try to remind myself that it is not just preserving, it is a really clear look into the future. We can play a role there.
Excellent, thank you. And everyone can see chat, so you can see there are follow-ups to these questions. There are additional comments. Thank you, Paul Starkey. Thank you, Ollie Douglas. But I would also like now to turn to a question to Cosette, also from Ms. Smith. Are any of these sites exploring the therapeutic benefits of engagement with animals? Cosette, you are muted, even though it indicates you're not. Try. Sorry, Cosette. No, still muted.
Deb, now you're muted too.
All right, well, am I heard now? Cosette, perhaps you could type your answer. Try again, Cosette. or I think she's typing her answer into the chat. Certainly, if you're not familiar with therapy, animals in therapy, it's a fascinating thing. I always used our Hereford cattle for therapy. I would take a nap with them every day. And Pierre, let's see. Well, I'm fascinated. I appreciate your proposal about, as does Jim Slining, about experience and levels of workmanship. So from Jim Slining, how is the level of workmanship as it relates, oh, I'm sorry, this is for Klaus. How is the level of workmanship as it relates to any given circumstance in history measured?
Well, this is a good question. I would gladly give back to tillers or other institutions because, well, I don't know if there's a real method of, especially in that field, measuring that. So I would be really glad about an open discussion because that would be key to get a better grip on it. Yeah.
Yeah, we have the makings for the next AIMA Congress program with all of these excellent questions. But Pierre, I would like to ask you, I appreciate your proposal for a national, for the French MERL programs being an international or Europe model. We in the US struggle with rural heritage and its visibility. So have you had progress with this proposal?
No, just a private proposal. We have a board next week to make the conclusion of this year program about tree and to find out the next item and to be also in connection with our patron. But I will propose that to open to other countries. Why not? The problem is that we are only the last weekend of June, just starting the holidays, and I explained it's a good idea to open the museum to start the new exhibition, but why not for other countries to come with us? It's free.
Seems like the perfect platform here amongst the AIMA delegates to offer that too. So sadly, we have 9 minutes of our break left, so I believe we must stop. This was incredibly rich, and stay tuned because Chantal her presentation will be shown later in this conference. Yes, but in respect for the next session,
Deb, I think we still have 9 minutes left. Actually, we start again at we have stop for the break at 3. So you've still got 50. You've still got 9 minutes of discussion, if you want it.
well,
I think you must be operating from a different program. Sorry.
All right, so let's talk a little more about workmanship then, as it relates to each of these presentations. So Cosette, I think you raised workmanship in various forms. If you would like to respond to this idea of levels of workmanship in any given circumstance in the past, how is it measured? And realizing Cosette cannot, we can't hear Cosette. Cosette, could you try signing off and then signing back in, and hopefully they'll note that you're waiting to be admitted, and then we will be able to hear you. Pierre, do you have any thoughts on this idea of workmanship? It's very central to Mills, it seems.
What do you mean by workmanship?
So Jim Slining has asked the question about experience, and I would translate it to levels of expertise. So within your mill project, how do you address the knowledge of millers? Perhaps that's
for mills. Okay, mills, they have their open days this weekend, this June weekend. They have a big problem actually for water mills because the French government and the environment want to ask every mill to open his, what do you call that, his dam, you know, where you collect the water. That's the main political problem. So they have to speak to the village, they have to speak to the population, they have to speak to the families against that, and they have to speak mainly to the elected people. It's a good way, this 2 days, to invite on your farm, on your museum, any elected people to explain, for example, the country life, the noise done by the cows, the noise done by the pigs and or by the dogs and so on. We have big fights actually, and also with the animal behavior, as Surajit has explained. We have in France a lot of claim against the livestock, actually, livestock industry, and it's a good way to explain the management of the farming.
Yeah, in a broader sense. Okay.
I had a question, if you can, to Klaus. I was trying to explain. Klaus, actually, the new technique for agriculture are non-ploughing, but seeding directly. With draft animals, you already have this kind of equipments for the future agriculture to seed directly without any ploughing. Do you have equipments for that?
Well, when I think about early medieval or medieval evidence, there is not really any significant, at least from the region I'm working in, that there was a no-tillage strategy. Of course, we always have to admit that we basically only know a glimpse of what was actually going on the fields, as the written evidence as well as other evidence is really minimal. The people which actually had the knowledge weren't able to read or write, and therefore we wouldn't know anything about it. What we try to do is to have an open mind about it and think about in the mindset of the technological possibilities to try out stuff and see what was possible, what we might not know something from today. And what we definitely can say when I think about our furrow depths, this is definitely a low impact tillage we do in comparison to modern agriculture, and therefore also more or close to what we know in organic farming, for example.
Well, and there have been a couple of questions that relate to nationalism and maybe regionalism, and wondering if we could talk a bit about that, because the local is not national necessarily. So do you all see a tension or potential between this emphasis on local?
If it's okay if I may start. The thing is, when I think about especially these rare breeds, we have a lot of ex situ conservation projects going on for local breeds in other countries, but at least from my perspective and my experience, the in situ organizations don't really recognize or really do want to work with those ex situ organizations, even if that means if a disease hits, that can mean the extinction of that breed. I think, again, and I mean, it's the right Congress for that, we need to underline the role of museums here. It's when I think about the museum networks, agricultural museum networks, it's so much easier to talk about this. It's when I think about many conversations I had, especially, for example, me being from Germany and talking about with directors and managers of living history farms in the US, where they imported the local breeds from Germany, for example, in some regions to there, and that now they're trying to reconstruct this local breeds. And it's so much easier on the museum level to do that international work and exchange and even the preservation than it is outside the museum context in a more, well, conventional farming scheme.
Mm-hmm. If I could then, in the last couple of minutes, ask the question that Carrie Lee poses. she's curious to hear if you could share a non-typical partner that has helped the group or your museum reach new audiences. And so in partial answer to this, I think, animal therapy, because you engage with accessibility communities and the medical profession. Goat yoga, I don't know if this has been available anywhere, but could each of you perhaps share a non-typical partner that has helped you reach new audiences? And Cosette, you may also still have to type.
I think that more and more, as Cosette said, money is main thing for rare breeds. And some people non-farming are investigating in gene or genetics marketing. Officially, to protect our genetic, we have in every country, a national one or international, gene banks, and it's getting marketed. Embryos are traveling all around. My job was to travel with livestock genes, but now it's embryos only, which are to against it. But easy to sell, as Clough mentioned. It's easy to sell and to transport embryos of rare breeds, from pigeon to dogs to live cattle and so on, large cattle. Or we have a big marketing with that of non-farming people investigating in genetics for the example of rare breeds.
It's a good example. Anyone else? Because I worry that we have exceeded our time now. Thank you all for a stimulating panel, and we look forward to hearing more from Belgium and their Brabants later. Thanks, Ollie.
Thank you, Deb, and I'm so sorry for any confusion I've caused with posting different versions of the program. I think I've caught everyone off guard with that, so it's entirely my bad. We're going to go into the break now. We've got a 15-minute break, and in the break, we're really pleased to bring a slight change to the program. We have a short video from Jacques Mahou, a French master baker, a tribute from him to the late great Muette Barboff, from her great friend Jacques Mahou, with thanks to Pierre Del Porto, Marie-Christine Aubin, and Jacques Mahou's grandson for helping to organize this in time. It may not be subtitled yet, and it's in French, but it will be available later by YouTube as well, and I'll post a link to the YouTube in the chat just now. So we'll be back at 3:15 British Summer Time, so 15 minutes.
Là, on a le levain chef de la veille de 8 jours à peu près. Il est bien alvéolé, il est parfait, il sent très bon. Voilà, donc ça, j'en prends 1 kilo. Je viens de le peser, je le mets dans la bassine. Voilà. Je mets la farine, 1 kilo de farine. Voilà. Et je mets 500 grammes d'eau. Voilà. Et là, je pétris. Alors, au bout de 10 minutes d'un bon pétrissage, on a une boule bien ferme, bien lisse, enfin pas lisse, mais bien ferme. Voilà, donc maintenant on l'aplatit, on met un film par-dessus, c'est un plastique hein, en l'occurrence, et puis on la laisse jusqu'à demain matin. Alors 3 kg de farine demi-complète. Alors 2 litres 200 d'eau. Là, c'est une autolyse qu'on va laisser 3 quarts d'heure. 75 grammes de sel. Ça, c'est le levain d'hier. Hein, il a bien grossi maintenant, il est bien bullé, il est bon. Là, du coup. Alors, pour 3 kilos, je vais mettre 3, 6, 900. Voilà, 910 grammes, c'est bon. 910 grammes de levain. Le pétrissage en route là pour 10 minutes en première vitesse. Voilà. Je pèse à 2,2 kg. Je pesais à 2 kg. Ouais, je suis à 2 kg. Alors, on fait une couronne bordelaise. Donc on fait 8 petites boules de la même grosseur pour faire 1 kg en tout. On fait 8 petites boules pareilles. Et on prend un sur les 8 que je vais abaisser au rouleau. Je le mets dans un panier à couronne. Après, je reboule les boules. Maintenant, je cherche un couteau et je vais couper là. Voilà. Voilà. Et je le mets dans mon panier. Voilà. Alors aujourd'hui, on est réunis pour faire un hommage à Mouette, notre ami Mouette, qui est malheureusement disparu. Et on voudrait lui rendre hommage, donc j'ai fait un pain avec son prénom dessus, un pain décoré pour lui rendre hommage. Mouette, c'est quelqu'un que j'ai connu il y a une trentaine d'années, en 25 exactement, et qui s'intéressait au pain et avec qui j'ai participé à faire une partie des travaux de lecture et d'écriture qu'elle a fait avec ces deux bouquins-là en France. Je sais qu'elle en a fait d'autres au Portugal. Et donc, c'est un hommage à Mouette. J'ai connu Mouette grâce à mon ami Lionel Poilane, il y a une trentaine d'années. Et c'est un hommage qu'on lui rend aujourd'hui.
Thank you for this honor. Thank you. I don't know if Ollie is hearing, but Mouette died on March 21. She was just finishing on Monday morning her last book about the French baguette. French baguette will be elected by UNESCO, presented by France to UNESCO in some weeks. And she finished her book on the morning and she had a heart attack in the afternoon. So it's a good honor for us, for Afma and Aima, on behalf of Mouette. Thank you.
And thank you to Pierre for organizing a wonderful tribute to Mouette. She will be greatly missed by many of us. Apologies for some of the confusion, technical issues that we've been having. Hopefully we'll manage to push on with the next session without too much trouble and confusion. Any problems should be blamed, as it says in the chat, roundly on me. This is session 9, using collections to inspire farming futures. We've got a brilliant panel lined up. I'll hand over to them to introduce themselves in just a moment, but just to give you a very brief introduction, this session is going to explore how museums, agricultural heritage, living history, and the kind of context in which we all work might play a role in addressing big challenges like food security locally and globally, and exploring both past and present. So issues of those large global challenges and colonial histories and legacies, contemporary development work, all coming into play. As I said, we've got a brilliant panel. We have Pete Watson, Winani Tabele, Paul Starkey, Atenchong Tele Nakubu, and Richard Rosenberg, all hopefully on call and ready to introduce themselves. I'm going to hand over to each of them in turn just to say a few words about their work and their interest in this sphere. I'm going to hand over to you first, Pete, if you're with us.
Oh, I'm here. Let's see.
Brilliant. Over to you.
Good morning and good afternoon and good evening, all. So great to be part of this. I'm Pete Watson. I'm director of How Living History Farm, a 130-acre historic site in New Jersey, USA, where we interpret the agriculture and lifestyle of a typical farm of the region, circa 1900, to some 65,000 visitors annually, about a quarter of them school children. During the years I've been there, we've acquired 80 surrounding acres where we're able to put the farm's history in a much broader context through the interpretation of extant and archaeological resources, including a grist mill, schoolhouse, blacksmith shop, 2 sawmills, and 2 other farmhouses. I am not a living history farmer by trade, but by accident. I discovered the field when I was working in a UN FAO animal traction project in West Africa, where one of the goals was to improve the performance of oxen through better yokes and harnesses. The research took me to places like Old Sturbridge Village, Colonial Williamsburg, Ross Farm Museum in Nova Scotia, and to the collection storage facilities in the basement of the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. If I had known about Aima then, and it was there, I could have done a much better job of my research, but I do think of our agricultural history as an unused treasure that can help farmers feed the world's growing population without compromising the natural and human-made resources we all need to survive. And I'll go on record here and finish by saying that if I get very lucky and win the lottery, and yes, I bought a ticket last night, I'm going to create a museum of practical history and ask all of you to serve on its board. Thanks very much for the opportunity to be with you today, and please wish me luck.
Thank you very much, Pete, and I'm looking forward to serving on the board of that when you win that money. We'll have to do it all by Zoom, of course, so don't put me in charge of the technical side of things. Can I hand over to Winani Tabele to introduce herself? We've already heard from Winani, obviously, but a few words of introduction would be really wonderful. Thank you.
A good afternoon to you all. I'm sorry, my internet is not the best today. It's fluctuating, I keep on losing connection.
If you can do your best, Winani, in the face of bad internet, that would be wonderful. Maybe while we work on Winani's internet and tech issues, I'll say a quick word of welcome to her. Winani is curator and head of ethnology at Botswana National Museums, and she's working both with ethnography and ethnology collections, but also on their current project to reinstate Bonington Colonial Farm and develop that into a museum project and site. It's the sort of late colonial era farm project, and I think Winani's coming to this with a whole range of expertise, both about working in and within networks of museum practice in sub-Saharan Africa, but also more broadly and reaching out, as she so generously have with her expertise and knowledge, to colleagues in Europe and elsewhere, to build on those kind of projects that she's been working on. I'm going to hand over now to Paul Starkey, and I should just briefly mention that Paul has been absolutely amazing in drawing together this conversation and has done a sterling job in the place of me, and I should have been drawing everyone together to have the conversations that Paul has. So thank you, Paul, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Good day, everybody. And yes, I'm Paul Starkey. Over 40 years ago, I studied tropical agricultural development at the University of Reading. I worked for 10 years in Africa, Malawi, and Sierra Leone. Then I became an international consultant in animal traction and transport issues with focus on rural development in countries of the global south. I've studied and photographed animal traction issues in 100 countries in the world and visited 150 countries. I've been associated with the University of Reading and the Museum of English Rural Life for over 20 years as a visiting senior research fellow. Most of my career has been spent researching and promoting neglected issues like animal traction and inexpensive sustainable means of transport, including bicycles. And these have been challenging tasks as the technologies are often regarded by urban elites as old-fashioned, backwards, and of little relevance in the modern world.
Thank you very much, Paul, for a very succinct but powerful introduction to your amazing work. I'm going to hand over now to Atunchong Tele Nakubu, who we've worked with here at the MERL, who's not from a museum background, but is very interested in the work that we've been doing, and was also one of the contributors to our 51 Voices project. So I'll try and post his link and work in the chat, as that was one of the triggers for some of the conversations that we're having in this session today. Atunchong.
Hi, I'm Atunchong, here PhD researcher here at the University of Reading. My research focuses on the political economy of agrarian systems, looking mainly at land rights and questions around power in Tanzania. Prior to my PhD, I worked with the Technical Center for Agriculture and Rural Corporations in the Netherlands. I've also worked as a technical consultant for the European Forum for Agricultural Research and Development. But more recently, I'm preoccupied by the lack of engagement with history, both as an understanding of the past and as a discipline in itself, so within development research and policy and practice. So this recent interest in historical representation informed my collaboration and contribution to the 51 Voices project on the 70th anniversary of the MERL at the University of Reading. And I'm extremely delighted to be here and to contribute to this Congress. Thank you, Ollie.
Thank you, Atunchong. And last but by no means least, the inspiring and amazing Richard Rosenberg, whose work I've only learnt of in recent years and through colleagues like Pete. And it's really wonderful to have you here with us today, Richard, to share your knowledge and experience. Over to you.
I'm Richard Rosenberg, or Dick, to many farmers and ox drivers. I started Tillers International in 1981 as an activist determined to use history to empower rural people, largely in the global south. They are not getting their equitable share of the global economic pie. From 1969 to 72, I was a Peace Corps volunteer assigned to the UNFAO in northern Benin, then Dahomey, to introduce oxen. Like Pete and Paul, that experience drove my career as a Midwestern farm boy and history buff. I could visualize many of the 1850 through 1900 American farm tools and practices being resized for local oxen. Tillers built a collection of about 5,000 tools curated by Jim Slining to inspire adaptive tool designs. Tillers has enjoyed the help of hundreds of great people, training over 25,000 farmers in Africa and Central America. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you to all our panelists for introducing themselves far better than I could have done. hopefully we've still got everyone with us. So we're going to move on to just sharing a few professional lessons from each of you. So we're going to go around the table again. So talking through any particular points you want to highlight in relation to agriculture, museums, and the idea of farming futures. So things that you think might benefit this particular audience. Pete, if we could start again with you from the top.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ollie. And, you know, I really need to say that in the planning of the historical farm where I work, the vision was always to farm it on as realistic a scale as possible, and in a way that let visitors experience the realities of farming. I've been doing it for quite some time now, and I'm never really quite sure what the job will be. Maybe that's something I like, but you know, that kind of goes with farming and the way it changes with the seasons, and of course things like weather and weeds and equipment breakdowns, insect hatches, and in cases like ours and perhaps yours, the mood of an ox or a pig on any given day. And the other huge uncertainty is the people who have come to see that farming and who want to leave with a takeaway, a better understanding of it. And there the possibilities are endless. So, you know, we are continually challenged to present a realistic look at agriculture in the setting of a historical farm, which may seem odd, but when you think about the type of farming that was very prevalent in our area at the turn of the 20th century, you know, a mixed crop and livestock operation like that holds all the lessons, the cycles, and the potential that we need to be good educators and to find ways to be relevant to our community. And so we're always grateful to those who saw that part of the planning process as key to our success. We try to farm and build programs around it. And if you ask, you know, what lesson we've learned, it is that unless we farm, the programs that we offer and the teaching we do isn't founded on anything that people can easily relate to.
Thank you, Pete. I'm going to try Winani again. Hopefully she's going to unmute, and we'll give that a try because I think she was back on the call. Winani, would you like to share one or two professional lessons?
Yes, thank you. I'm back. I just hope I'll manage because it's so unstable today. But otherwise, the lessons I've learned in Botswana in particular, traditionally, Botswana are cattle barons. They keep cattle mostly, and in most cases, it was even not for commercial purposes. One would just have hundreds of cattle and they will just be enjoying looking at them, and they will be used maybe for a bride price, to slaughter when there's a funeral and what have you. The farming, as in plowing, cropping, came with the white people during the colonial period. But what we see now is Botswana going into commercial farming, where they are doing both keeping cattle and plowing and for the market. So it is really very interesting. If you are developing a museum like the Bonington Open Air Museum, and you see the kind of farming implements that you thought were for the yesteryears, and now you see them, you know, being used in the current farms with a little bit of more modern farming implements. It becomes very, very interesting just to show people that there's been an evolution, there's a connectedness between now and what used to happen then. So these are the lessons that I've learned so much, that we want to make sure that every new innovation that comes in is also reflected in the Open Air Museum, so that people see the evolution, you know, in the agri industry in Botswana. Thank you.
Thank you, Winani. And I think we're all grappling with those challenges of how to incorporate contemporary ag into ostensibly historical and heritage holdings. I'm going to hand over to Paul Starkey now. Paul, if you could share one or two professional lessons from your wide-ranging career.
Thank you. I've learned that animal traction is a sustainable technology for smallholders farming, but that all farming is based on compromises on a daily, annual, and long-term basis. Compromises between the best technologies and affordable technologies, between maximizing outputs and reasonable inputs, between multi-purpose and specialization, between tradition and changes, between production, ecological stability, profitability, and the quality of life. I've also learned the need to respect and benefit from indigenous knowledge and local experiences. There have been far too many examples of the white savior approach to agricultural development, with north-based organizations trying to transfer technologies to the global south without taking time enough to understand the local realities. It's not just a north-south issue. The arrogance of underestimating local knowledge and research is widespread in most countries. Urban-based policymakers, ivory tower academics, international organizations and research centers tend to promote modern agricultural technologies without understanding the limiting factors and the socioeconomic realities of smallholder farming. And finally, another lesson is that networking, including what we're doing here today, is a highly effective means of sharing information, learning lessons, positive and negative, and creating a critical mass for supporting neglected issues.
Thank you, Paul. That's an amazing list of food for thought. Atenchong, picking up on some of those issues, can I hand over to you to highlight one or two professional lessons from your career?
Yeah, it's interesting that I'm coming in like a development researcher or development practitioner in the midst of museum experts, and it seems to me that there is a consensus, at least theoretically, that history matters. But when it comes to the design implementation of development policies, there is an absence of acknowledging the importance of history on the ground, of local history, and what this leads to at best is a lost opportunity in the quality of scholarship and policy response, and at worst is a selective and partisan version of history, which to me is invoked to support hegemonic hierarchies and maintain dominant power structures in today's global political economies.
And I wonder whether you would agree that the University of Reading represents part of that and needs to have some thinking of its own. Can we move on from there very quickly, and we can come back to some of those issues, Atenchong, to Richard. Richard, if you could share one or two professional lessons from your career and the wonderful work of Tillers, that would be amazing.
Yeah, the lessons include that the world is a lot smaller than you think. You can build a global network with consistent effort. That high-tech agriculture is not all that it's cracked up to be. For the Amish in the US are still successfully farming with draft horses. For 30 years between the world wars, horses maintained a significant role on the American and European farm. That uneducated farmers, for them, training is most effective in the field, close to the home farm. I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you very much, Richard. We're going to jump on now to just some quick fire questions, just geared towards one or two of our panelists, and then hopefully we'll have time to open up to questions from the floor at the end. So I'm going to start with a question about collections and field demonstrations and all those sort of approaches that we use, websites, outreach, ways of sharing information between generations and between different countries and cultures. And I want to ask Pete what his lessons are for us as museum professionals in terms of those kind of practices. What are the best examples, best practice in that kind of area that you can think of? Are you able to unmute, Pete, and join us? Is Pete still with us?
Sorry. The importance of the discussion about intangible culture plays into what we've been able to do at Hal Farm, because our collections are not of the material kind. They are the processes and practices that enable us to do living history. And the 40-year effort that it has taken to assemble the tools, get them correctly restored, in some cases reproduced, to use them in ways that accurately portray the methodology and the lifestyle of the times, can be lost in a single generation of staff. One miss on succession planning, one failed attempt to be relevant to the community that might cause a loss in funding, can cost us everything. Learning how to pass skills on is a huge learning curve for anyone who does living history. It's something that in the old days was done through apprenticeship systems, or by handing the lines over to the kid who was going to be driving the horses or the goat, the oxen. Now we come and go to these historical sites and shut the gates at the end of the day. And it's a very difficult context within which to farm. I remember the story of one of our interns from Quito, Ecuador, whose father, a dentist, had advised him to never become a farmer, although he had grown up on a farm outside of Quito with his grandfather and loved it. He came to us to learn how to use oxen because he and his brother were selling organic milk to the Hilton Hotel in Quito by increasing the herd of oxen that dairy cattle that his grandfather still owned. Yet they knew that they couldn't produce enough forage on the steep slopes. And the grandfather remembered that they were able to do that with oxen, not a tractor. No one remembered how to even train or yoke an oxen. So the importance of being good historians and conserving and collecting for futures that we don't know about is clear. We have to do this, and we have to be able to share what we learn with those who can find ways to use it. We can't judge whether it's right or wrong. All we can do is learn it well and be prepared to share information that others may be able to use successfully in maintaining sustainable farms and lives.
Thanks, Pete. I think that's really telling in terms of coming out of our ivory tower as being practical, hands-on historians doing things out there in the world. If I could put the same question to Richard in terms of what are the key sort of techniques and bodies of knowledge that he's used in terms of intergenerational knowledge transfer and sort of connecting different cultures and contexts.
And there are many. To start out with, I think we need to go back to basics of the value of artifacts is in comparison. If we have multiples, we invite more distinctions and draw out more critical lessons. Training is most effective in the field conducted by hands-on trained local people. And that mirrors Pete's comments about Ecuador. We believe strongly that innovation can be taught and fostered. And we need to develop a series of lessons to do that, but we've done that with tillers. That moves somewhat into levels of expertise that Klaus and Jim Sliming were talking about. Very critical.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Richard. I think that focus on education and skills development is a really key one. I think, unfortunately, Wanani's internet must have dropped out, but hopefully she'll be able to dial back in. And I was going to put the next question to her, but perhaps I can put the question to Atenchong. I'm wondering what we can learn from the historic and ongoing processes of combining different experiences in agricultural systems. And that's with a particular focus on sort of international sharing or combining indigenous knowledge with external technologies. So picking up on some of what you were saying about sort of breaking down those hegemonies and sort of biases.
Well, from my experience as a development researcher or practitioner, if I may call myself that way, I mean, it seems to me at least that development practice and policy has overwhelmingly pursued a model of technical manipulation. I mean, an oversell of modernization of agriculture, which is extremely Eurocentric. And I would argue that this has systematically or deliberately neglected human and historical experience on the ground, especially in indigenous and rural communities, and the level of expertise. When I visit rural communities in Tanzania, where I focus, my research is focused, there is a wealth of knowledge that must be acknowledged, must be put to the fore when discussing about development practice and research, which is often undermined. I mean, I've these morning sessions from India and from Clough in Germany also speaks to the importance of marrying, I mean, cross-learning, and Clough mentioned how it's difficult outside of the museum setting to enforce some of these cross-learning opportunities and experiences. And I think it's extremely absent within development research and practice, mainly because of the politicization of development itself.
That's brilliant, Atenchong. And it feels like, in some ways, a slightly damning indictment of a shed full of old agricultural technologies and archives related to companies that made those technologies, rather than the sort of social history grassroots voice of the farmer and the agricultural labourer that we pretend to be here at the MERL. So I'm being very self-critical there. I want to move on to ask Paul to think a little bit about agricultural history and modern agricultural development, which I think can be seen as two sides of the same coin in some respects. So that idea of somewhere like the MERL developing in parallel with agricultural extension within the University of Reading is a good example. Some people say we must look forwards and backwards, and to some extent I'm one of those people. And there are lots of positive and negative lessons from these things. But how do you respond to these kinds of ideas? Where do you sit in relation to them?
Yes, well, we have so much to learn from past experience. Yet modern agricultural researchers and specialists on the whole seldom take a historical perspective. I remember researchers at an international research institute in the Philippines trying to design from scratch an animal-drawn rice plow without understanding the many different styles of plow working well in paddy fields in Cambodia, Vietnam, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and elsewhere, all with both advantages and disadvantages. Again, transport authorities in Asia and Madagascar tried to ban from public roads vital transport using narrow cartwheels. They could have learned from UK and other countries where differential road tolls had been used to nudge change and discourage heavy carts with narrow wheels, which damage the roads. I've seen many examples of failed projects attempting to introduce so-called improved technologies. For example, the animal-drawn wheel tool carrier was developed and perfected by agricultural engineers in UK, in France, in India. The implements worked very well on research stations, but were rejected by smallholder farmers in the global south who had smaller fields, weaker animals, and preferred a range of simpler, lighter implements. There have been numerous comparable examples of the introduction of exotic animal breeds and plant varieties that were not appropriate to the local conditions. And it's extremely important that lessons are learned from experiences and are shared. Negative lessons of failed projects can be very useful, but people, and donor agencies in particular, do not want to publicize expensive failures, so limiting their learning and progress. And I wonder if the same is true of museums. Are museums mainly sharing lessons of the successful people and the successful technologies without giving enough attention to the failures and the losers? A failure can be a positive lesson for others, but it must be shared. And that is where networking can help share experiences, good and bad.
This reminds me of the fantastically named agricultural cul-de-sac of the Dungle dozer, a special kind of attachment for tractors to move manure around, which I was offered one of, but politely declined because we didn't really have space, sadly. But largely because it was such a cul-de-sac, it hadn't succeeded, whereas other technologies had. And you know, you're really bang on there, Paul. It's a real challenge for us. Hopefully, Atenchong's piece that's in the chat about the groundnut scheme speaks to the fact that the MERL is at least beginning to face up to the need to talk about big failures, that being probably one of the largest agricultural focused colonial failures, or certainly one of the most famous. So I wonder, turning to you, Atenchong, museums like the MERL and other agricultural museums tend to highlight the importance of hardware, so tools and machines, but the development of methods and technologies depend on lots of other less visible processes lying behind the scenes, so land tenure, financial capital, sociocultural issues, that kind of thing. How do you respond to those issues, and how do you think we could respond more effectively within museums?
I mean, the MERL has done the first bit of trying to focus on history, which is a failed practice or a failed development effort on the groundnut scheme. But unfortunately, we are living, I mean, history at this very moment. The same scheme was implemented in Tanzania through the SAGOT, the Southern Agricultural Growth Corridor scheme, and Paul has emphasized on how we undermine or we don't learn from history, and history keeps happening in circles, and local communities are suffering and experiencing almost the same struggles that they struggled post World War II. If we had just looked back at history, we would have learned a lot from the groundnut scheme, but I'm not sure those lessons were learned. And this, I mean, the development, the museums must also understand that they don't exist in a vacuum. They exist between political and financial institutions. Museums are being financed, and all of these comes with some sort of what I would like to call a perverted version of nationalism that drives these political and financial institutions, and donors themselves are also have their own interests and objectives, and all of this must be taken in context when talking about history and understanding the politics of historical representation within museums.
That's really fascinating, and I think that sense of positionality is something that's really vital, and I can think of no one better actually to follow up on that than Paul, because Paul admitted to me the other day that he had visited, I think, 150 different countries in the course of his field work, so he probably has the most encyclopedic knowledge of anyone I know of direct hands-on experience on the ground in different sort of working contexts. So Paul, how do you follow on from there?
Yeah, well, I think the promotion of small farm tractorization in the past 40 years in Africa has really exemplifies this. It's lacked sufficient understanding of the historical implications of both animal mechanization and tractorization. Planners just have not understood the financial, environmental, support chain, sociocultural timeframe implications of using tractors on small farms. Historically in UK, tractorization was increasing costs and debt, and some farms went bankrupt. Bigger, richer farms bought the failed farms, which led to increasing farm sizes and the displacement of agricultural families and workers. In much of Europe, and in the large-scale farming sector of the global south, there is now capital-intensive farming. They have modern specialized equipment that has replaced the older multi-purpose labor-intensive systems. But these challenges came over time with much small farm failure, land reallocation, social hurt and disruption. And this needs to be shared by museums and understood by the policymakers.
Thanks, Paul. And I can see that Winani's fantastically. We've got Winani back in the room. Winani, we sort of jumped ahead. We've been talking a lot about agricultural development, about land tenure, some of those big contemporary challenges, but also the historical facets of that. And Atenchong shared with us the idea that maybe we haven't learned those big lessons from history that we should have learned. So we talked about agricultural history and agricultural development as being kind of two sides of the same coin, that sort of looking forwards, looking backwards approach. And I wonder whether you might share with us some thoughts about how you might address those challenges of looking to the past, but also looking to the future at Bonington and in your wider work.
Second. Okay. I'm sorry.
I'm slightly putting you on the spot because you've come back in
Yeah,
partly.
it's a bad day, and I'm a little bit lost. I'm a little bit lost, but I think Botswana is not like really a big industrial country. We are still young and developing. But I don't know. What I've just been seeing is just the interesting linkages between different communities of the world. From what we have here, the other day when I saw Watson, his picture with the ox drawn, the horse-drawn plow, I felt, oh, but this is the same thing that we have here. And traditionally, we use cows, we use the oxen to pull the plow. And I thought it was, okay, something of the old. And to me, it was really very interesting to notice that, you know, even countries like America that we think are so developed also use the same implements. So it kind of shows me, even though now, okay, in the rural areas, people still use the same things, but otherwise now people have gone into tractors.
Yeah,
it's a modern farming implements, and so I think at Bonington we want to depict both, just to show that even though people have industrialized, there's more modern ways of doing things, but still these are still in practice, and people can still use them, because in the rural areas, in Botswana in particular, they would use donkeys in the rural areas instead of the horse. So it was interesting for me to see the horse, because, okay, we have horses, but in farms, so they are not like, you know, in large scale. So I think that's the little that I can share. I'm really like,
that's really wonderful, Winani. I think what's interesting there is the need to reflect those international parallels as well as differences. So I think that's something that we could all work more powerfully towards and actually help each other with, in terms of looking cross-culturally at shared histories as much as at contrasts and difference. I want to move on now to talk briefly about Aima institutions and the kind of place like my own institution, the MERL, with our dusty collections, hopefully not as dusty as sometimes they're perceived to be, and those institutions that perhaps haven't started to engage critically with ideas of farming futures, ideas connected to the global south, and need to start to become a bit more involved in those kind of areas and spheres. Richard, could I ask you to respond to that with your knowledge from the sort of tiller's perspective? How can we get into that more meatily?
Well, I mean, I think that all of the agricultural museums could make a real contribution to the welfare of smallholder farmers in the South. And it may be easier to do that than you think. And I'd like to just drop a few tips. To begin with, a small-scaled engagement of international visitors to your cities. and you can find nearby professors of agricultural engineering, agricultural economics, or others who bring visitors from the South. Yeah, involve those visitors in collection tours and field demonstrations. Help them find the labor bottlenecks that your tools will address. Ask them how their smallholders would answer these questions. What are the busiest 15 days of the cropping year? What field functions are they doing at that time? Tillage, planting, weeding, harvest. Select tools to redesign that focus on bottleneck functions. That will help you be appropriate. Support the visitors' design and fabrication of prototypes to be fabricated with local materials in country, with local tools and skills as they exist. Museums can become public innovation hubs through this engagement with the South. After all, we've long been in the innovation business. Sponsor youth makers clubs with a mission to design for the South. Host adult makers to help your visitors fabricate their designs. Send makers to the South to assist local fabrication. Create alliances between museums in the North and others in the South. Supply digital images to deep dive innovation groups meeting in museums of the South and include farmers, men and women, and fabricators. These alliances could be led by an Aima working group. Above all, stay humble. Remember that farmers have seen their ecology cycle through many years. You have not. Listen and learn.
Thank you, Richard. And that feels like a really neat point to be summing up. That's a list of things that we should all definitely be doing, and that the AIMA can hopefully play a major role in. We have got one or two questions in the chat, so I just want to very quickly put those in a rapid fire way to a couple of members of the panel. My colleague Ree Smith asks, as the study of rural history has increasingly been divorced from agricultural university departments here in the UK and possibly elsewhere, how can we best engage contemporary agricultural researchers with agricultural heritage? I think tillers have done that in an extraordinary and new and innovative way over the past few decades. But I think Atenchong, you might be rather uniquely placed to address that question as someone coming from the other side of that relationship, and someone who's had someone from a museum pestering them. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I'm hosted by the School of Agriculture, and I've struggled to walk almost across the university to go to MERL to meet Ollie for our meetings, and I don't see so much engagement within colleagues in the building, in the agricultural in the School of Agriculture doing the same. And I think there is much to learn from the history of the MERL itself, which used to be part of the School of Agriculture. It seems strange that this link is not there and as highlighted. And I think this is in part to the issue of careerism, which has some sort of ravished the academic system in the UK, and a pursuit for peer reviews and things like that within the university. The marketization of academics and things like that has limited this drive within colleagues and this motivation to follow interest in history or interest in museum and historical studies. I think it's a question of politics, it's a question of economics, it's a question of the structure of our academics, our educational systems as they are nowadays. I mean, what I have done personally is that I try to engage with the museum. I make part of my research focused towards exhibitions. I've tried to host a couple of exhibitions linking the museum and also informing my research with colonial practice and colonial failures, part of which was the Granite scheme. And this has, I mean, this has helped me as a researcher to understand the impact to understand development research itself and development practice in the long run.
Thank you, Atenchong. I think Winani would be keen to come in on this. We're going to run just a minute or two over. I can't quite bring myself to bring this conversation to an end yet, but if that's okay with everyone. Winani, over to you.
Yeah, I think what the scholars could also pursue is what I mentioned earlier, the linkages between the different communities of the world, because it is really interesting to find that some communities in Europe are traditionally doing the same things that communities in Africa are doing. Like I mentioned the example of the horse-drawn plow. I know of the University again of Museum of Zurich, the collaboration they have with a museum in Uganda. They realize that there are some commonalities between their communities on the history of milking cows, and they use the same objects, I mean the same artifacts. So this collaboration has developed into exhibitions, exchange visits, they've done publications. So I think it's another way of, digging into the history of agriculture and farming by looking at the different communities of the world, how they've done things, and to see where we have common areas. Thank you.
That feels like a really perfect note to finish on. We've been doing what we can within the Aima community to broaden our network and broaden our conversations. I think picking up on something Richard said earlier, where museums in the global north could be doing more, and likewise museums in the global south could be doing more to reach out to each other. I think sometimes we're in danger of just looking for like institutions. And I think the conversation we had with Nerupama starting this morning about an organization like INTAC, which is taking an entirely different approach to gathering kind of intangible cultural heritage, perhaps is moving more towards the model that somewhere like the MERL represents, but is actually far removed from it. And we can learn far more from INTAC than I think they can learn from the MERL. The MERL's model and many of our sort of traditional museum approaches feel to me like they've slightly stagnated. And we need figures like Paul with that immense sort of global international knowledge who can draw together different players from different disciplines. So that speaks powerfully to some of the challenges that Rhys Smith has raised in the chat about sort of disciplinary specificity. Thank you to all my amazing panelists today, and thank you again to Paul for drawing us all together in a couple of preliminary Zoom meetings. I hope we'll carry on with some of those meetings because I really enjoyed the ones that I was able to dip into, and maybe we can draw this panel and other colleagues together in future IEMA events. I'm sorry we've run 4 minutes over. I'll just very quickly give you a heads up of what's coming up tomorrow. Tomorrow we have the informal social event, the Commons artists that we're working with. We're hosting just a brief 45-minute sort of fairly informal drop-in session, and do come and join us if you're free tomorrow. It runs from 5:30 to 6:15 British summertime, so that's local London time for me, and I'll be wandering, hopefully live stream around the galleries of the MERL, showing you some of the Commons installations that are already in there for that intervention around the galleries. We might have some breakout sessions if we have enough people present at the session, so do pop along for that if you can, and if you can't join us for that, then do join us again on Monday when we'll be kicking off at 1 o'clock British Summer Time for Understanding Museums, Objects and Sites, session 10, chaired by my Aima colleague and Director General of the Canada Agriculture and Food Museum, Kerry Lee Birchill, who we've heard from earlier in the program. And finally, we're going to play out, hopefully, technology permitting. I'm not pressing the button, so it should be fine, with Chantal Bishop's presentation, the draft horse techniques in the picture. Chantal couldn't be with us, but I'm sure she'll happily answer any questions in follow-up afterwards. So that's playing now. Thank you very much for a wonderful day.
Hello everyone, I am Chantal Bishop and I work for the Center of Agrarian History in Leuven, Belgium. CAG is an expertise center for the history and heritage of agriculture, food and rural life. I'm there responsible for intangible heritage. That means that on a daily basis I help and support several heritage communities in their safeguarding of their intangible heritage. What I would like to do today is to share our experiences in creating audiovisual documentation of intangible heritage. And I will focus on a very interesting project on participatory videos of draft horse techniques. First, I will show you a short introduction film on this project, and then I will tell you some more about the context in which this project was developed. I will dive deeper into the different steps of the making of and show you some footage of the results to point out the future possibilities of this method.
Een Belgisch trekpaard is eigenlijk een uniek ras dat heel bruikbaar was in verschillende economische sectoren. Dit project heeft tot doel om de kennis van de trekpaardencultuur en dan voornamelijk de technieken die daar deel van uitmaken voor de toekomst te bewaren.
Het is vandaag de dag heel urgent dat we die trekpaardentechnieken nu gaan vastleggen, omdat we merken dat steeds minder mensen die technieken nog beheersen. Waar een aantal decennia geleden eigenlijk heel veel mensen nog wisten hoe dat je met een paard moest werken, hoe dat je die moest optuigen en mennen, zien we dat dat een steeds kleiner groepje aan het worden is van ook wel steeds ouder wordende mensen. Dus het was wel nu de moment.
Het betreft eigenlijk een kennis die men bijna niet in neergeschreven vorm terugvindt. Dus men kan niet in archieven of documenten gaan duiken om te weten hoe men met een trekpaard moet werken. Het is ook een kennis die men enkel door te doen eigenlijk kan bewaren en verfijnen.
En om dat te gaan documenteren is audiovisueel documenteren of filmen een perfecte oplossing.
In beschaafd Nederlands, dat is het kopstuk, dat mogen geen kopstuk maar worden zeggen, dat is een toon.
En daarvoor hebben we een documentairemaker gezocht. En dan zijn we gaan samenzitten met een aantal hoofdrolspelers in die trekpaardenwereld om samen te gaan nadenken van hoe we dat gingen aanpakken. Zij hebben mee nagedacht en mee gekozen van welke technieken zijn hier dringend en zeer belangrijk om te gaan documenteren. Hoe gaan we dat doen? Met welke paarden? Met welk materiaal? Wie kan er daarvoor best aan bod komen? Dat is eigenlijk allemaal samen met die erfgoedgemeenschap beslist.
This short elevator pitch actually explained already the whole project in a nutshell, but I want to dive a little deeper right now. This project didn't come out of nowhere because in the last few years, we worked already closely together with the heritage community of the Belgian draft horse to support their several safeguarding initiatives. And as a result, in 2018, the culture of the Belgian draft horse was included in the Inventory of Intangible Cultural Heritage in Flanders. And in this safeguarding process, the need to document some draft horse techniques was often mentioned by the heritage community. So we did a little bit of experiments in smaller projects, and then we get funding for a larger rural development project, Belgian Draft Horse. Together, we give heritage a future. In this project, we worked closely together with 3 draft horse organizations and the province of Flemish Brabant. And part of the project consisted of researching and documenting 3 relevant draft horse techniques. And then on a warm summer evening, we had lengthy discussions with these draft horse lovers to discuss which techniques were most relevant and most urgent also to capture on image. So finally, this all resulted in several documentary videos. First, we made a trailer and this elevator pitch that we already saw. And then our documentary maker, Sander Tas, he turned each technique into 2 different films. On the one hand, a short dynamic film for a wide audience to increase support for these heritage practices. And then, on the other hand, he made a longer step-by-step tutorial in 3 parts of each technique for a niche public of specialists to safeguard actually the techniques for the future. Each tutorial comes also with a written manual, as you can see here. And you can watch all these videos, all these YouTube embedded videos on the project website and on the website of the Center of Agrarian History, as you can see here. And today I want to show you some small parts of the tutorial videos, just to give you an idea.
Dit is een sleepketting en die van een strophaak. Dus wat wil dat zeggen? Ik doe met de haak de gesloten kant naar het paard zo mijn ketting door de haak. En je ziet als ik ga trekken, die haak die gaat zich eigenlijk stroppen aan de boom. Ziet je? Dus hoe harder het paard gaat trekken, hoe feller de ketting rond de boom gaat spannen. Wat goed is, want als die boom bijvoorbeeld ergens achter blijft hangen, tussen een aantal bomen, die gaat zich opspannen. Dus als het paard trekt, dan kan die ketting vrij zijn eigen meer aanspannen. Snap je wat ik wil zeggen?
Dus ik kan nu mijn ketting een paar keer ronddraaien. Eén keer. Dat paard nog redelijk verder van de weg is. Wat gebeurt er nu? Zelfs laat ik onze staar trekken. Wat doet die ketting? Die begint af te rollen. Gelijk op een katrol. Maar die begint te draaien. En als de boom hier nergens niet breekt, breken boven die takken uit. En dan draait hij zijn eigen van boven los. En dan zou hij daar zo gezegd normaal zijn eigen moeten uittuimelen, gelijk wij zeggen. Maar ik zeg het is redelijk gevaarlijk. Dus ik ga maar heel zetten. Ik maak de voeten maken. En nu gaat het, je gaat zien, de boom gaat beginnen draaien. En hopelijk breekt hem niet af naar onze kant. Dus. Harry. Ho! Ho! Als je ziet, is gedraaid. Ho! Zoals je ziet hier, hij staat tegen die andere tegen. Dan moet je die daar van de weg trekken. Past altijd op, want dat kan breken. Dat hij niet op je kop valt.
Now that we've had a quick look at the tutorials, I want to end this short presentation with some lessons learned. How did we handle this and what are the do and don'ts, so to speak? And first and foremost, the aspect of taking enough time is very crucial. It is the heritage community that is central in this whole project, so you must take enough time to get to know these people and their concerns, their passion, their needs. Time is absolutely crucial to build a relation of trust. But time to do some research is also important. Certainly, if you want to make in-depth technical tutorials, you must provide enough time for the technical briefing also for the documentary maker. Second, provide feedback at every stage. The heritage community here was involved in the content and at every step of the documentation process, even in the final editing of the films. For example, we organized an avant-premiere of the films for all the people involved, and we did that in their village cafe, as you can see here on the pictures. They could comment there on the edit of the films, but also share their experiences with each other, with me, with the documentary maker on the whole process. And by providing input, they really could become the owners and ambassadors of the videos. And third, it is a tailor-made process. There is no such thing as one right method or one size fits all solution. The approach and outcome always depend on the aim of the project, the target group, the available time and money, but above all, the process must be tailored to the specific community and their priorities, and of course to the heritage practices and the techniques itself. The proud and enthusiastic reaction we received of the draft horse community showed that this was a beautiful and well-supported initiative. They easily share the documentaries on social media. They even use them in their own beginner courses. So we see that the videos do much more than just preserve living knowledge. People get excited to keep and work with draft horses. As a conclusion, we can say that the medium of film is a very attractive one for both the public and the heritage community. We saw that during the entire filming process, they started to think about their heritage from a different perspective, actually. It often brought new insights, and it was also a stepping stone to new safeguarding initiatives. In the future, we definitely want to explore this method of making participatory videos further. And so, thank you very much for your attention, and I hope to see you all soon in real life again.